Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it.
Archie, where are you looking again? His wife shouted at him. Sidey, just waving his hand at her, there were young girls on the road whom grandfather liked to look at. Oh, and you'll wait. She only sighed and went behind the stove. Stop talking and put the tea on, Archie grumbled. I'll put it on. But what are you doing? All my life with you. Maria couldn't stand the way her husband behaved. Sometimes she was ashamed, especially when she was young. She had to blush for him. Lie down. Maria heard him. She quickly lay down on the ground and covered her head with her hands. Immediately, there was an explosion. Clods of earth flew at her. It was impossible to lie down for long. It was necessary to move forward, and suddenly the wounded, they need her help. Alive. She crawled on the ground and turned over the Red Army soldiers. Some were just concussed, squinting, unable to open their eyes. Another was rolling over in the trench. Nurse. Suddenly there was a quiet cry. Yes, sweetie, I'm here. She crawled up to him. What have I got? His face and hands were covered in blood. Now, the doctor will take a look. Everything will be all right. She grabbed him by his jacket and dragged him along the ground. The soldier himself helped her with his legs. It was dangerous to get up. They crawled only 5 meters, and the girl was already exhausted, but she would never show it. She had to take the wounded man to the infirmary, which was located here on the battlefield. Maria lived with her parents. She had just finished school. Everything was good. It seemed that only a bright future lay ahead. What do you plan to do? Her mother asked her. I don't know, enrolled in a nursing course, the girl was smiling. Good, that will always come in handy in life, her father praised her. They were all sitting at the table together when the radio announced that war had broken out. How is it? The girl looked at her parents with frightened eyes. Which was to be expected, the man sighed. Everyone had been preparing for this for a long time. Yes, it was unexpected, but many were talking about war. There was nothing left to do. The man knew that soon he would receive a summons and would have to go to the front. Yes, how will we be here without you? My wife began to wail. Honey, don't cry. I think that not only me, when the summons comes, no man will stay at home. Everyone will go to defend their homeland, hugged her husband. And I'll go. Maria got up from the chair. Where are you going? You're not old enough yet, laughed her father. Why everyone goes and I cannot. The girl realized that after the course, where she will learn how to provide first aid, she will definitely be useful to her country. Well, sit down for now. No one has not yet come and did not call you anywhere, her mother told her and patted her on the back. Maria went to her room. It was scary. It was one thing to talk about the war, and another when it all happened in reality. The girl imagined that now simple young boys, who have not smelled gunpowder yet, will be taken to the place where they will have to die. When the girl came to the course today, she saw that everyone already knew and prepared to help. Comrades, the instructor who was supposed to teach them about medicine addressed them. Instead of several months of training, we will only have one. The crowd began to whisper, and what will happen then? Shouted one of the young men. You'll probably be taken to the front lines if there are no disabilities of any mutilation, the man replied. What about you? He asked the man defiantly. I too will not be left out. As soon as this wave reaches us, I too will be in the ranks of the Red Army. Young men and girls from that day began to learn medical skill. But if the girls were specifically taught to make bandages, clamp wounds, apply splints, and other things that will be useful to them at the front, the boys were taught practically nothing, only how to help themselves. Not even 2 weeks passed, the summonses came. They came to every house where there was a man, a young man. Girls were not obliged to go to the front, but they could do it voluntarily. Maria decided that as soon as she finished the course, she would immediately go where she was needed most. Maybe first to a hospital, her mother asked her. Here, if they don't take me to the front, I'll definitely go there. The girl packed her things. Archie, cried her mother. She did not understand what a young girl to do there on the front line. But at the same moment, she knew that no one would be left out of this damn war. It will touch every family. Mommy, do not cry. Everything will be fine. The girl believed in it. Because such young, optimistic, and happy people cannot just die like that. Oh my girl, they hugged each other. Maria was waiting for the deadline to come to the military enlistment office. She was delaying because there was nowhere for the apple to fall. All the boys wanted to be there. Some ruled their age, some just waited. Are you sure you want to go there? The man in the uniform raised his eyes to the girl, who was a little taller than his desk. Of course, she wouldn't have come at all otherwise. She spoke clearly and sonorously. Good, he noted her courses in medicine. That was it. Now Maria was going to where the fighting was. She was both looking forward to it and dreading it at the same time. As they rode in the truck, it seemed to be business as usual, quiet, no war. The girls were brought to some kind of training ground. What are we going to do here? One of them asked. A small exercise, the other, who was older, reassured her. What exercises? That I'm there. My head will not bandage, laughed another. Talkers, they heard a man's voice. Everyone stood still. Now it would not have occurred to anyone to laugh or talk. It was hard. The girls were running, carrying machine guns and heavy bales. These imitated a soldier with his weapons, who would have to be carried from the battlefield. In the evening, all the girls, both older and younger, sat so tired that they could not even lift a hand. Even a spoonful of porridge was heavy. On top of all this, the girls were taught to shoot. A little time passed, and Maria and her friends were ready to go to the front. The girls were put in the car. They talked, laughed. Each did not want to show that she was scared. Maria, who do you have left at home? They asked. Mom, she answered sadly. The girl knew that she would have to stay at home for a reason. She would have to go to the factory. She would get up and go. And I have no one, cried one of the girls. Suddenly, something buzzed above their heads. The car swerved to the right, but it was too late. There was a terrible explosion. One was wounded. The other was thrown aside. Many who remained in the back, they were no longer alive. Maria lay in the bushes. Her ears were ringing. She wanted to see where everyone else was, but she couldn't. Then she closed her eyes and pressed herself to the ground. Somewhere in the distance, something was rumbling, rattling, but to Maria, it was all just a rumble. She lay like that until it was dark. When it was dark and everything was quiet, the girl got up and looked around. Her head was still a little noisy, but her eyes could see normally. Is there someone here? Maria whispered, but no one answered her. She walked forward, all the time hiding behind bushes. In front of the girl saw a wooded area. She decided that it would be easier to move there. She hid behind a tree to look around and then went on. When it started to get light, the girl went into a thick shrubbery. There she sat down, decided to take a nap. Maria, wake up, she heard through her sleep. Who's there? She opened her eyes sharply. But there was no one around, but there were voices somewhere. Maria looked closely, saw that they were Germans, and ran in the opposite direction. Then there was an open space where she had to crawl almost all the time. She didn't know exactly, but it was about 4 days later when she saw wooden log cabins that only came out of the ground a little bit. She realized that this was where ours were, and she rushed over there. There was no strength at all, but she managed. Stop, who's coming? They stopped her as soon as she came into sight. I'm my own Maria. I need to go to the chief, she almost cried. Who's your own? 2 soldiers laughed. But the girl was not to laugh. She fell to her knees from helplessness. The boys picked her up and dragged her to the dugout. There Mary was put on a bench which stood here. At the table sat a man in military uniform and looked at her spitefully. Well, and who are you? Where are you from? Why are you dressed like that? He looked at her without looking away. The girl pulled out of her pocket all the documents she had, put them on the table. What are these? He nodded at them. A Komsomol card, proof that I took a medical course, she began to enumerate. How? He raised his voice. We went, and there was a bombing, scattered, and here I am. Through the woods and fields, straight to you, she began to tell confusedly. At that moment, the man was looking through the papers on the table. I see, we need to sort it out. He stood up. The girl also rose to her feet. She walked over to the table, picked up a pencil, and started drawing on the paper. There she finished, all the while the military man stood behind her and watched. What is it? He did not understand among the squares and dots that Maria had drawn. This is a village. This is an open space. Here is a forest, she began to explain. The dots are guns, and the squares are tanks. And you memorized all this? He squinted. Yes, she nodded. Okay, I'll take you to my location. But watch for me, he wagged his finger. Thank you, and she slumped senseless. Maria was carried away, put on a bed. When she came to her senses, she was fed and given water. Can you get up? A young girl who was next to her asked her. Yes, Maria said confidently. She started to get up. She felt a little dizzy, but she stood for a while and it went away. After that, the girl was ready to go into battle, well, of course, her own. The soldiers immediately noticed this little skirted girl. She was here and there, managed to do everything and everywhere. Praise, the senior soldier said to her. Thank you, I'm not trying for myself, but for the country. Maria was so proud of herself when she managed to drag the wounded to the tent with the medics. Sometimes they had to be knee-deep in clay and mud, but Maria couldn't leave anyone there in the field to die. She had to cover herself. She had to carry a huge man and his weapons. Once on the battlefield, she was shot in the leg. Her body was so sore that she almost broke her teeth when she clenched them to keep from screaming. How are you? The surgeon asked her when she was in the tent. Fine, Maria had already given herself a tight bandage. She lay down on the bed to close her eyes for just a moment. Their tent moved around a lot. The girl never once regretted coming here. And now today it was battle again, explosions all around, and she was dragging this poor guy on her back. She felt that he was helping her, but it didn't make it any easier. She was also afraid that he was seriously wounded, and with these movements he would only make himself worse. Help! She saw two men who were very close by. They rushed over, picked the guy up in their arms and carried him into the tent, then came back for Maria. She was covered in blood, but not her own. Maria went up to the surgeon, asked if she needed anything. He just nodded his head for her to move away. The girl herself did not understand what was happening to her. There were so many people like him. She never paid attention to anyone, but here, it's like some kind of attack. She hadn't even seen his face, but she could feel it in her heart. Can I sit with him? She asked when the fighter was moved to the bed. Please, the doctor answered. He had no time to think about it. Maria sat by the bedside, stroking the young man's head where the bandage was. She left when she had to, but she spent almost all of her free time with the man she had brought here. Who are you? She dozed off and heard his voice. Maria, she opened her eyes and looked at the guy who had come to his senses. And I'm Archie. He wanted to smile, but he didn't do it well. Hello, she looked so tenderly into his blue eyes. Were you the one who got me out of there? He asked the girl. Yes, she wanted to pet him again, but this time she didn't dare. Thank you. He closed his eyes. Maria went for water, brought it to give to the fighter. Here, sweetie, drink it. It'll make you feel better. She tilted the iron mug. What are you babysitting me, Run? You probably need it. He took a sip and did not open his eyes. All quiet for now, she said. Archie was on the mend. He could already sit up on the bed. Maria was helping him with everything. And what, now I'll get on my feet. Will you go out with me? Smiled the guy. What date? The war is around, she grumbled at him. So what? You're so brave. We won't lose. He winked at her. Come on, stop joking. Let's go for a walk. She gave him her hand. In a couple of weeks, Archie was as fit as a horse, though he still had a bandage on his head. Shall we go for a walk? He gave her an elbow. Let's go. The girl grinned. They walked a little way to where the ropes with underwear and bandages were stretched. Maria was taking everything off. He was helping her. I'm probably going to be discharged, he said sadly. And what? You'll go home? There are not enough men's hands, she told him. Where are you from? Archie asked the girl. If I tell you, will you come back after the war? She asked. Yes, he nodded. Only then the girl told him where she had lived before with her parents. Why are you so sad? The guy noticed it. I remembered about Mom and Dad, she honestly admitted. There was no news from them. Nothing, the victory is coming soon. We'll come home. We'll live like before, Archie told her confidently. How do you know? She stared at him. I know that our people cannot be broken. He clenched his hand into a fist. It was 44. It had been so long since the beginning. So many people were just despairing, doubting that victory would really come. "Maria, what are you with him?" A young nurse came up to her. "Why?" The girl didn't understand the question. "Yes, he is still that walker. Not a single skirt will not miss," said to her that whispered. "I have not seen, I do not know." She turned away from the girl. She saw Archie looking at other girls, but she didn't say anything. They were just chatting. "What are we whispering about?" He came up to them. "About you," Maria said, and looked at him with a look that made him sit up. "What about me?" He was having fun. "That you are a woman hunter." Maria shook another bandage and hung it on the rope. "Don't listen, they're talking." He furrowed his eyebrows and made a serious look. "Oh, that's it. Go already." She didn't want to, but she saw the way the others were looking at them. She didn't want anyone talking about them. Time passed. The young people socialized. He would come in the evening, whistle. She would come out. Archie would grab her by the arm and drag her to the nearest shelter, and there he would start kissing her. "My darling," he whispered to her. "Archie, don't," he said, and she gasped for breath. "Maria, I'm leaving tomorrow," he told her and looked into her eyes. "But I promise I'll be there." And kisses again. "How? Where to?" She tried to push him away so she could talk calmly. "I don't know. Maybe they'll send me home." He breathed heavily. "Will you come?" She squinted her eyes, as if to remind him what they were talking about. "I'll come. I'll definitely come." He pulled her against him. "I'll be waiting." Her head was on his chest. That evening, she ran off to her place and the guy remained standing where they had just been. The next day, she wanted to get up early to see her Archie off, but she didn't have time. One errand another, when she ran out, they were gone. "Don't feel bad. You didn't lose anything." The same girl came up to her. "Fuck you." She didn't look at her. Maria continued to serve, but never forgot about Archie. What a fool. Why didn't she ask where he lived? She reproached herself, but now it was too late to think about it. Maria had been through practically the whole war. In winter, she was wounded, a month in a hospital bed, and then home. "No, I don't want to," she cried, but no one would listen to her. She had done a lot for the front, for the victory, and now, with a serious wound, she had to go home. But what about here? She realized that she would no longer be able to fight as selflessly as before. "Archie, we can manage here without you, and you should go home, get married, have children," said an old woman who also took care of the sick. Maria was sad. She did not want to go anywhere. She got into the car and drove to where she thought her mom was waiting. When she got there and saw the area where they used to live, it got bad. Almost no houses were left. The girl saw in the distance that the hut of grandfather Ivan was not touched, rushed there, then stopped. Why was he not touched? But after Maria saw that many other houses were broken but standing. "Grandpa Evan, what happened here?" She ran into his hut. "Oh, Maria, don't ask." He was lying on the bed by the stove. "And mother?" She looked at him with big eyes. "Go to Julia. She will tell you everything," he coughed. The girl ran out of the old man's house and ran to the house of the one who had been close to her since childhood. "Hello." She ran into the porch. The doors were open. Aunt Julia was sitting on a stool near the table. She was looking at one point. Her head was completely gray. "Hello, Maria," she said in a lifeless voice. "What happened?" The girl sat down beside her. "Igor," she showed what she held in her hands. It turned out to be a funeral. Aunt Julia told me afterwards that it was the third. She only had 3 sons, so the war took all 3 of them. "Excuse me, where's Mom?" Maria couldn't help herself. "There," she waved her hand behind her back. Maria went inside the house. There was a woman lying on the bed. Yes, she looked remotely like Maria's mother, but the girl did not recognize her. "Mommy," she sat up to the bed. Maria came back. She raised her hand to stroke her daughter's cheek. Tears sprang from her eyes. "What's wrong with you?" her daughter cried next. "It's okay." She wrinkled her nose. "I can see it's not." Maria pulled back the blanket to examine her mother. Her legs' arms were intact. Then what happened? She crouched down next to her again. "Daddy," the woman cried again. "Was it because of him that you brought yourself to this?" Maria asked. "I did not know it became bad. And that's all. Well, Julia came to visit and would have died there. In your place did not wait for you." The woman kept crying. Maria stopped crying. She wiped her tears, went back to Julia. Maria now realized that these two women needed her. So there is nothing to shed tears and longing. We need to live on. Soon the victory. Someone will return. Someone we will never see again. That's life. The girl was only 19 years old, and she was already thinking like that. After that, she went to the place where they lived before the war. Yes, the house was damaged, but it could be cleaned up. Archie would come and we'd fix it up, she said aloud. The girl was determined. She had a lot of work to do. She had to get her mother back on her feet and make sure Aunt Julia didn't get sick. Maria started the household. She washed and laundered everything. Then she took care of her mother. She knew how to do massages. Then she went home and took some herbs that they always had drying in the barn. Her grandmother had taught her how to make potions. Aunt Julia, get up, Maria said every morning. It was not easy for her, but she had to do something to keep the two women alone and bedridden. The spring had been a stormy one. When everything began to bloom, many people began to talk about victory, and Maria believed that soon everything would fall into place. Her mother was already able to move a little. In the morning, she would sit on the bed and Maria would feed her porridge. Julia also cheered up, realizing that it was impossible to bury herself like that. And so May came, followed by the announcement of victory, our victory. People in every corner were celebrating this event. Why are you sitting there crying? A woman asked Maria. And what if he does not come? The girl cried. Who? The aunts became alarmed. Then Maria told them their story with Archie. They knew each other for nothing, the mother wondered. You know what he's like, Maria recalled dreamily. Now she waited for him every day, running to her house, in case he sent word or came, and she was not there. But Archie was still not there. What if he had married already? She looked at Julia as they sat at the table. When did he get married? She grinned. So he was to be discharged before I was. He came. And there are women hungry for men. So he found a wife, Maria assumed. Listen, do not make up, Aunt Julia, though she suffered for her sons, who were now lying somewhere on the battlefields, but already a little even began to joke. Well, I won't talk about him anymore. Marie was sad. The men gradually returned, some without an arm, some without a leg, but most of them looked healthy. The village began to rise. Houses were being put in order. Children began to run along the roads. Maria sat at the window. She looked at the green lawn near the house and dreamed. Isn't that beautiful girl waiting for me? Archie stood right in front of her. What? Maria was so deep in her thoughts, she didn't recognize him. You've forgotten, haven't you? He frowned his eyebrows, just like the other day. Archie, how did you find me? She almost fell out of the window, hugging him. I came where you said, and they sent me here, he smiled. God, alive, and I already thought. She ran outside the fence and began to kiss and hug him. Maria, I promised. How could I not keep my word? He lifted her off the ground. Let's go quickly. Probably hungry from the road, she called him into the house. There wasn't much food, but there was something to eat. The girl sat him down at the table. Aunt Julia came in and started asking questions. She waited. Maria smiled. I can already see that, the woman said resentfully. Archie, her mother called her from the room. What? She came running in. Can you help me? She held out her hands to her daughter. Sure enough, she helped her up, and with the help of the Beethoven and the girl, the woman made her way to the kitchen. Wow, Maria, you've got a fiancé, sat down on the bench. That's enough, the girl got embarrassed. All right, you can go to our house and get settled there, said the woman. And what about you? Maria stopped and looked at her. Well, you are not going to the end of the world, was happy for her daughter mom. From that moment, Archie and Maria began to live together. He saw what needed to be fixed and immediately went to work. And then, when everything was more or less back to normal, Archie went to get a job. He could do a lot of things. We should get married because the neighbors are already talking, Maria told him. I will, he kissed her. Aunt Julia took her dress out of the closet, the one she was getting married in. Together with Maria's mother, they trimmed it here, sewed it there, added ruffles here, and it turned out very beautiful. Daughter, the dress is ready for you, the women said to her when she came to them. It's beautiful, it's yours, she looked at Julia. And now it will be yours. She hugged and kissed the girl. Thank you. Maria couldn't get enough of him. Although it was still hard in the village, but everyone was invited to the wedding. The villagers took everything they had out of their cellars and chests and set the table. Everyone raised a glass to the young couple. Grandpa Evans sat on a chair. He leaned on the gate and took a harmonica in his hands. It became fun. Then Aunt sang songs. The young people who stayed behind picked up. Maria was a happy bride. She looked at Archie and could not believe that she had saved her husband for herself. From that time, they began to live already as husband and wife. Time passed, and the village grew more and more prosperous. Archie was now working in the field on a combine harvester. Maria liked it very much. She went to the local Mercer station and worked part-time. Maria, you're that to Cindy yesterday came by, said to her grandmother Zena, who came for help. He was just hungry. Maybe he didn't listen to her. She was on her way home to talk to her husband. You're at it again. Not for nothing I was told that not a single skirt do not miss. She stood over him with a towel in his hands. Who are you listening to again? He was sitting at the table. Grandma Zina said that you were at Nakis. She confessed to him. Really? He made big eyes. And if I see or hear you again, you'll go back to where you came from. The girl didn't stop. She had a lot of courage. Archie, I only love you. He held out his hands to her. Yeah, she turned away, but did not cry, so as not to show weakness. 2 years after the wedding, Maria felt that she was expecting a child, made her husband happy with this news. He only smiled, was happy. At that time, Maria had helped on the field. There were not enough hands, and there was a lot to do. She lifted up a pitchfork with straw, and it was as if something tore in the bottom of her stomach. Ouch, she screamed. The women immediately realized what was happening and picked her up, but only just managed to bring her to the edge. What are you doing? Who does such things at this age? Shouted at her one of the older in the brigade. Petrovna, enough, we need rags, commanded Selena. Her mother used to be a midwife. As soon as this was said, everyone immediately took off their top skirts and covered the ground with them. That's when one of the combines stalled. Hey, have you fallen asleep? The men shouted. Oh, look, there's a girl giving birth, and Archie doesn't care about anything, just to look at someone's ass, said one of the women. Some laughed. Others watched the process. Some of them ran after Selena's mother, who was already old, but she knew her job, and Maria was lying there breathing heavily. Come on, disperse. They heard a squeaky voice. They looked around. Grandmother Gudia came. She sat down in front of the woman in labor and began to give commands. Soon a child's cry was heard over the field. Archie, you have a girl, the men shouted to the happy father. At that moment, Maria was loaded on a cart and was already being taken with the child to the place where she was working part-time. And what to do here? You have already done everything. The worker of the medical center waved her hands. Maria was happy for the second time in her life. She was holding the little baby she loved so much. Archie, come here, she called to her husband. What? He quietly came up behind her and put his arm around his wife. Together they watched their daughter sleeping in the crib. Let's have another one. She turned to him. Whatever you say, my love. He kissed her. There was no time to sit with the child. It was necessary to work, but Maria was dissuaded. They said that until spring you can and rest, and the daughter needs a mother's affection. She languished in idleness at home. Maria, one day the chairman came to see her. Yes, she didn't expect it. What happened? Your husband. He wagged his finger, took off his hat and sat down. What has he done again? Maria blushed. He was watching the milkmaids changing clothes. They saw him and squealed. He wiped the sweat from his forehead. Again sighed Maria. She had enough of such stories. When their men get together, they'll give your Archie a hard time. He stood up and headed for the door. I'll talk, she promised. And at that moment, little Leslie came into the kitchen. Her mother took her in her arms and cried. How happy she was with him. But this bad habit of his did not give her peace, in front of all the neighbors already ashamed. Were you crying? He came home. You can cry here? The chairman came. She looked at him. So what? I took one look. He didn't even hide it. What's wrong with me that you stare at them? She didn't understand. I can't tell you the answer to that. I just like it. That's all, he said. When Leslie was 2 years old, her mother was pregnant again. Now no one would let her go to work when her belly was already big. This time she gave birth with the help of all the same Baba Goody, only in normal conditions. This time the couple had an hair berry. Thank you, wife, you've done well, her husband hugged her. Enough already, she jerked her shoulder. There was more work to do around the house. Maria asked Aunt Julia and her mother, who was staying with her, to look after Leslie while she took care of Barry. She should go to a nursery, the women said. But what kind of kindergarten in the village? Once there was a normal one. But after the war, only ruins remained. In one hut, the former teacher organized a group, but how many people were in it? As Selena says, so we'll lead it, Maria answered. She continued to work, just like her husband. Maria, I'm going to kill your Archie. Mickey came up to her. He was Cindy's husband and Archie liked to visit her. What again? She sighed and blushed. You shouldn't be hanging around other people's women. He showed his big fist. I'm sorry he's a concussion, but he only comes in to eat, and if Cindy hadn't made him feel welcome, he wouldn't have come in. I warned you, the man was getting away from her. Maria couldn't take it anymore. When her husband came home from work, she suggested he move to the city. Are you, mother, fallen out of your mind? How can we go there? He looked at her dumbfounded. Normal. You'll get a job at the factory. Hands are golden. I'm still at home with the baby, she said. And where does this house? He was puzzled. We'll see, while we can go to my brother. She could not find anything else to say. Well, look, you're fearless, he shook his head. I can't listen to these complaints anymore. You'll be killed. And what? I'll be left alone with the kids. She stared at him without taking her eyes off him. Okay, wait a bit, we'll move, Archie promised her. Maria waited, but her husband did nothing to make what she said come true, so she started to find out for herself. She went to Aunt Julia's house. Hello, she entered the house. And good day to you. The women greeted her. They had just gone to the bath and were sitting at the table. Leslie, come in, she held Barry in her arms. A bath? Julia thought. We can go to the baths, Maria said. She undressed the children and took 2 of them in at once. When they were all washed and drunk with tea, a serious conversation began. Aunt Julia, don't you have a brother in town? Maria asked. You know I do, the woman wondered. Why the conversation? How could I get Archie to live there? And then I would come with my children, she began from afar. Listen, if he to the factory, he will be immediately allocated housing, especially family, as if she remembered. Well, and if to your brother, at least for the first night, insisted Maria. Of course, let him go. I don't think he will refuse. The woman was sure of it. Well, thank you. Give me the address, asked the girl, and Julia immediately wrote it on a piece of paper. Maria gathered up the children and went home. She was walking past Cindy's house when her Archie came out of the gate. What were you doing out there again? She asked him, and it took him by surprise. Jesus, you scared him. What are you doing here? He was holding his heart. Went to see Julia. Answer the question, she stepped on him. Archie, I was just passing by, and I saw Cindy making pies, so I thought I'd drop in. He justified himself. Would it bother you if Mickey was here? Come on, let's go to your Cindy's house. She put her son in his father's arms and went to the gate. Hello, neighbor, she opened the door. Maria, how are you? Cindy wasn't scared, just surprised. I came to ask you why you feed other men's husbands pies, she said, putting her hands to her sides. Yes, he comes himself, and why not treat? And the woman waved her hands. And what does your husband say to you about it? Archie promises to kill him. Maria looked at her. What's Mickey got to do with it? She looked at the guest. What's that got to do with it? He's your husband, Maria wondered. We're just having tea, she fussed in the kitchen. Tell him that. She turned around and left the house. Her husband wasn't at the gate. He must have gone home with the children, and Maria went the same way. What are you starting? You're embarrassing me for the whole village, Archie told her at home. And you don't embarrass me, the village, 3 people. Everyone knows everything about each other. And he's getting on, she put the kettle on. Okay, I promise I won't come round again, he promised her. Maria lay at night and thought, now they are in the village, she knows everything. And what will happen if they move to the city? No one would say anything to her. and her husband would go out with girls. She couldn't sleep. She kept tossing and turning from side to side. In the morning, she was very sleep deprived. "Maria, get up," Archie said loudly. "I hear you're up." She stretched and got out of bed. The children were still asleep, and she went to the kitchen to make breakfast. In the evening, she gave her husband the address of Julia's brother. She told him to go and see him over the weekend and find out everything. Mickey did. He agreed with his wife on everything. "There's a shortage of hands at the factory. They'll hire you there today." Anthony met him. "What about housing?" That was Archie's biggest concern. "You'll ask there," the man said. When the work week began, Archie had been in the human resources department since morning, waiting for his bosses to be free. As soon as the man walked in there, he stood up and walked over. "Hello, and I'm here to see you for a job," mumbled Archie. "Okay, write an application," said the man tiredly. "And housing?" Archie was as simple as 3 pennies. "And with this, we need to think," stopped the boss. "I have a family, children," added the newcomer. "All right, let's go," called him into the office. They entered, sat down at the table, and then some papers were placed in front of Archie. "What's this?" He didn't understand. "Look, I have an old house. If your hands grow from where you need, you'll do everything. You'll live or a hostel," raised his eyes boss. "I agree on the house." Archie remembered how after the war he came to Marie. He had to remodel almost half the house. "Nothing. How fast you are," the man told him. "If you work like that, you won't be a laborer for long." Archie liked being noticed by the man who was hiring him. Now he would do anything to stay here. He had a week to move his family. How could it be so fast? Maria couldn't understand. She was hurriedly packing. "And what to drag? Here you have a job, a place to live. Come and enjoy life," he said cheerfully. Maria went to her mother to tell her that they were leaving in the morning. She was only happy for her daughter. "You just don't forget, come back," the woman said. "I will, as soon as we get settled," and immediately promised her daughter. "And what about my brother?" Julia asked. "And what will he be? Lives, works." Archie did not say much about him. That's how they said goodbye. In the morning, Archie, Maria, Leslie, and Barry were at the bus stop with big bales. "Not there. Are you moving?" one of the locals asked them, who was also going somewhere. "Yeah, to the city. I got a job there," Archie said. "That's good," the woman nodded. They didn't talk again. When they got there, they were all tired. "What a wreck." Maria looked at the house. "It'll be fine," her husband promised her. "We'll see," she sighed, realizing that there was a lot of work to be done. Until the weekend, the new owners were doing something: sweeping, washing, slapping. Archie was outside pounding something. His wife didn't say anything to him. She looked out into the yard to call him for lunch and saw him stuck to the fence. "What did you see again?" She came up to him. "Nothing, I'm just looking at the neighbor's property," he said. Maria looked, and there is a neighbor working. "Ah, and how is it in their vegetable garden?" she asked her husband. He blushed. "Well, that's how it is." He waved his hands. She took his hand and they went into the house together. And since Monday, her husband went to work. Maria stayed at home for the time being. She knew that here, unlike in the village, there were kindergartens, so she went there. Leslie was accepted at once, but there was no place for Barry. But she was promised a place as soon as possible. "Oh, Archie, I feel sick again." Maria woke up in the morning feeling dizzy. "The third?" he guessed. She must have gone outside. Should have gone to the hospital, but there was no time for that. When her mother went to pick up Leslie at daycare that evening, she was told she could bring Barry too. That was happy news. Now the woman could go about her business without the distraction of the children. "Well, how are you doing?" asked after work happy father of the family. "Bad," wrinkled wife. The third pregnancy was very difficult. If the first two, she did not even notice that in her body something is happening, but now there was no such thing. Understandably, he sat down at the table to eat dinner. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. "Yes," shouted Archie from his seat. A pretty woman entered the house. "Hello, my name's Kathy. I'm your neighbor. I saw you coming a long time ago, but we've never met," she said and took off her shoes. "Do you know how to make pies?" Maria didn't know what had gotten into her. "What's that got to do with it?" She looked at her. "No, it's just that my husband doesn't eat mine. He likes to bake from neighbors." His wife turned to him. Oh, what are you talking about? Katie was embarrassed. Maria realized that all this is not for nothing. And do you live alone or with your husband? Maria felt bad, but she pulled herself together. My husband went missing in action in 44, the woman said. I'm sorry, Maria realized she was being tactless. It's all right, smiled the neighbor. She went to the table and put a pot on it. What's that? Archie sniffed. Here, I made dumplings. I wanted to treat the neighbors, she said cheerfully. So come to us more often with treats so that Archie does not run to you, said Maria. All right, then we'll be friends. She sat down at the table. No one else nudged anyone else. Everyone sat in a friendly manner. Even the children from the room came in. You have a lovely family. Katie said goodbye to them. Thank you, come on in, Maria said good-naturedly. When the neighbor left, the wife looked at her husband. What? He turned to her. Did you like it? Maria smiled. No, he averted his eyes. Archie, she showed him a fist. I figured it out a long time ago, he said guiltily. I hope so. His wife got up and went to the children. It was so bad she couldn't breathe properly. A month later, it all started. Archie, Maria screamed. The man rushed to her. What to do? We need to go to the hospital, but how? Then the man ran to Katie. She said she would help. They entered the house, took Maria under the arms, and led. Every step was difficult. Why didn't you say something before? Archie was breathing hard. When I dragged you to the field, it was all right, she said, gritting her teeth and enduring the pain. At this point, Kathy looked at Archie. She didn't know their story, so she was very surprised. I'll tell you later. He realized what his neighbor was thinking right now. Good. She was having a hard time too. But lo and behold, the building where they were going showed up, and in that moment, it was as if the strength had been added. Maria was put on a stretcher and carried away. And you, Daddy, come back tomorrow. The woman in the white coat closed the door in front of the man. Okay, he said, and he and Katie walked back home. So what was the story? She couldn't wait to find out, and Archie told her straight out about meeting Maria. That's how it was, he said. After that, you should carry her in your arms. Katie was amazed. I am, Archie said. This time, the family had a girl again named Angelica. The mother was happy. There would be helpers in the house. But Archie was a little gloomy. He wanted a son. But nothing, if it works out, you'll have a son, Maria reassured him. Time passed, the children grew up, and Angelica went to kindergarten. Leslie went to school, and Maria wanted to go to work. When she finally got a job, she was like a chain. She got a job at the same factory as her husband, only not in the shop, but in the administration itself. If she was told to do something, she quickly grabbed the job, and after a while it was already done. Well, Maria, you're a valuable person, praised Maddie, who was here with her. Just stayed home a long time, did nothing, missed you. She was telling the truth. What do you mean you haven't done anything? What about the kids? What about the house? It's all routine, Maria smiled. I see, and with your husband, how is it with you? Maddie sat down next to her. And why do you ask? Maria tensed. Just, you don't think anything. She immediately perked up. It's fine, she answered her question. Good, Maddie went to her seat. Then she said that there were more things to do and left the office. Maria sat there thinking that Archie might have messed up here as well. She wondered who to ask, but she never came to any conclusion. And in the evening, she had to go to the garden, pick up the children, after that help Leslie with her studies, and cook dinner. But it was all to Marie's satisfaction. Where were you so long? She asked her husband, who arrived 3 hours after her. When the men sat down, he came up to his wife. She heard a smell from him. What are you doing? She made big eyes. Yes, they could get together at the table and drink a little, but to have it like this in the middle of the week, it was impermissible. Now the woman was also afraid of what her colleagues or neighbors would say to her. What's the big deal? A little relaxed, he answered her. Go to bed, Maria told him menacingly. In the morning, when she came to work, the whole factory was already judging about yesterday's situation. Maria, did you hear that? Maddie came over to her again. About what? The woman was afraid to hear it. What did the men do last night? She was ready to tell, but she saw that Maria was not very interested. What was it? She couldn't sit there and take Maddie's stare. They got together after work in the locker room, got drunk, and then went after the women in their shop to peep, she said, and put her hand over her mouth. Jesus, here we go again, she blushed. What? Yours was there too? Maddie was blushing now. You didn't know. Maria looked away, thinking that Archie was the one who'd gotten everyone to do it. Sorry, Maddie left the office. Yeah, go pick up more gossip, Maria told her. She didn't know how to look people in the eye at the gatehouse. Even though she didn't know who the women were, she felt like they were all looking at her, so she looked away. Archie, she couldn't stand it when he was home. What did I do? I just looked. He couldn't understand. Disgraced yourself and dragged me along with you. I can't look people in the eye now, she answered him. What did we see there? He started to eat what his wife gave him. And on the weekend, Maria went to her neighbor's house to distract herself and talk. How's it going? She'd set the table. Why did you come alone? I didn't want Archie to come, Maria admitted honestly. Are you in some kind of trouble? Katie guessed. Yeah, he's in trouble and has been for a long time, she shook her head. And what is it, if it's not a secret? The neighbor became curious. You see, he has some kind of mania. He likes to peep. Maria did not raise her eyes because she was ashamed. What's the big deal? Lots of people like to read letters and peek in windows, sat down across from her Katie. He only peeps on women, Maria admitted then. Well, that's not nice, she blushed. Why? Maria didn't understand her embarrassment. Yes, I just thought, sometimes from the bathhouse I go in one shirt, and if he looks uncomfortable as it is, she blushed even more. I told him, peep after me, even when I go to the bath. I leave the window not curtained. But no, he said, not interesting. She again stared at the table. So here with permission and they're not, laughed Katie. They talked some more and Maria went home. The kids were waiting there. After she talked to her neighbor, it felt a little better. Archie was in the kitchen waiting for her. Why are you sitting here? My wife was surprised. No reason, he smiled. Talk, she realized. Everything was for a reason. Maria, the bosses called us in today. He turned away. So what? She realized the rumors had reached there. Everyone was reprimanded, and in public, he knew his wife would find out anyway. It was better to confess himself. Did you get it? She just said it and went to the kids. I wanted to cry. Well, why did she get him so? And again, she remembered the words of that nurse, that in vain she looked at him. But Maria still loved him, and the feeling was exactly the same as when she had sat by his bedside. Children, let me read you a story, she said to them when they were already in bed. Hooray, they shouted with glee. In a certain kingdom, in a certain state, began to read the mother. Archie heard from the kitchen as Maria began the story, realized she would never come out to him again. He too was worried about what was happening to him, but he couldn't help himself when he saw a pretty girl. He continued to work, and Maria kept up. They never went to the factory together, always separately. Maria, until she divorced all the children, only then went to the office. Well, how are your children, friend? Maddie asked her. They had worked together for so many years that they knew everything about each other. Good, Leslie is helping the younger ones with their assignments, the woman said. And her husband? The coworker looked at her like she knew something again. What's my husband got to do with it? She hadn't heard he was involved in anything in a long time. I was just asking. She looked away. Maddie, if you know something, tell me, Maria insisted. I don't know anything. I was really just asking. The woman started to work. She was counting something. In the evening, Maria decided to ask Archie what had happened. She prepared dinner, sat down at the table, and waited for Archie. Hi, he came into the house. Tell me, she looked at him. What? He looked at her. I don't know. What's going on at the factory again? She didn't take her eyes off him. Maria. He averted his eyes. Maria, am I going to be ashamed of you again? She got up and started to set the table. No, he sat down. What then? She put a cup in front of him. We were in the bathhouse at the weekend with the men, so one of them said that he knew a place where you can peek at the women who wash in the next ward. He blushed. Why are you blushing now? You didn't blush then. She sat down opposite her husband again. What am I doing? I'm not touching them. I'm just looking, he said, and he believed that there was nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying anything, but why do I have to blush all the time? She was ready to cry. Don't listen to anyone. He started eating. The kids will grow up soon. If they find out, or at school, what then? She couldn't understand what his craving was. And nothing, he did not begin to explain, because he himself did not understand it. Leslie was already in the final grade. It was necessary to understand that the girl has grown up, will soon build her own life. Mom, an address for me to make, she asked Maria. Of course, I even know a wonderful seamstress, the woman said about her mother. The last time they had visited her was about 3 months ago. The woman was living in her house again. Even then they had talked about it. Is she sure she'll make it beautiful? The girl didn't want to fall in the mud. Of course, the woman hugged her. This weekend, we are going to my mother, Maria told her husband in the evening. Do I have to be there? He looked at her. No, you can stay with Barry and Angelica, the woman said. Well, why aren't they coming with you? He wondered, since they were there as a family every time. Leslie and I are on a business matter. The wife didn't go into the subject. That's what we decided. Maria at the factory got a beautiful fabric. At the weekend, they were already sitting at the table in the village. Look what we brought. Maria took out a piece of fabric from her bag. This will make a very beautiful dress, thought the grandmother, immediately heard to Leslie. What kind? The girl was curious. You'll see. Show her your wedding dress, asked her mother. Maria pulled out of the closet that dress, which once made her Aunt Julia and her mother. Oh, it's beautiful. Leslie appreciated it. There, and you doubted it. Her grandmother kissed her. The next morning, mother and daughter were home because they were busy. Now their house was being expanded. Archie decided to do some construction and add another room, and the land allowed for it. Everything all right? His wife asked him. What could be abnormal? He wondered. Just by asking, Maria knew that if there was something abnormal, she would definitely hear rumors. Right now, all she was doing was helping the kids with their studies, going to work, and doing chores around the house. It's been a long time since Kathy's been here, Archie said. Come and see what she's doing, she laughed at her husband. Well, don't be like that. He lowered his eyes. All closed the subject. Maria realized that the conversation for her husband unpleasant. Mom, tell me about the war. Barry came running into the kitchen. Sit down, she showed him the seat next to her. Then came in Leslie and Angelica. They liked to listen to the stories that told Mom. Oh, why do you listen to her? She has some dull stories. Do you want me to tell you one? Archie, why don't you? Maria looked in his direction. No, why not? If the children want to know, he smiled. Tell me, they were already shouting. So we are lying with a comrade in an ambush, around snow, cold, and we cannot move. In front of the enemy, we need to find out where they have a ZOT. After that, to inform their own, and then the battle, said quietly father. Yeah, you tell me that you jumped out of the trench and first went to the ZOT to cover their bullets while they do their job, laughed Maria. Why are you always messing things up? He asked her. Why are you messing with the kids? She took offense as to why he couldn't tell the moment he was wounded before they met. She herself had asked him several times and he wouldn't tell. And now she reminded him of it. Okay, look, he exhaled. You're really going to tell me? Marie couldn't believe it. I will. He folded his hands on the table. Ready to listen. So many years have passed. She already did not hope to hear that legendary story. We were sitting in the trench, and suddenly, the offensive. The commander shouted, attack, and we were shaking, but we couldn't sit, because the order was given not a step back, so everyone jumped out. Only the machine gunners were left, running like fools, yelling hurrah, with the commander behind us. It's not clear who was running where, but as soon as the explosion started, so ended our bravado. You know the rest. He was sitting there, not looking at anyone. Dad, you're our hero, Barry said loudly. Thanks, son, but I'm no hero, shook his head. Mary felt so sorry for him at that moment. She sat up to him and stroked his head, just like she had at the hospital, kissed him on the cheek. Even if you are a hero or not, I still love you, she whispered to him. And I love you. The children saw for the first time how like this, Mom and Dad sit side by side and confess their love to each other. They will never forget this moment, and then they will tell their children and grandchildren. It was graduation time, and Leslie was getting ready for the day. "Mom, and how was your graduation?" asked her daughter then, and Maria remembered that day, but did not say anything. "Good," she smiled. "Hopefully, and we will be fine." The girl was happy, also because of the fact that her grandmother sewed her such a beautiful dress that all the girls should be jealous. After graduation, Leslie was going to enter the institute, which is far from home. "Why did you choose this one?" Her mother didn't understand. "I do not know, just I want to be an engineer," answered the daughter. She knew that the local factory requires such a profession, so she decided to study and then return. "And how will you go home?" The mother was only worried about that. "Everything will be fine on vacation," came up and hugged her daughter to her mother. At that moment, Maria realized how her mother felt when she, even at a younger age, was going to war. Here she was, Leslie going just to study, and she was so worried about her. Well, she kissed her. "May you be well. You've got married before, Angelica. They won't let you get bored," laughed the older daughter. "That's for sure," smiled the mother. She was happy that she had such a family, all alive, healthy, loving each other. In the middle of the summer, the daughter left. The mother and father saw her off. "Don't cry," Archie hugged his wife. "I'm not crying." Maria brushed a tear from her eyelashes. It seemed to her that not long ago she was lying on the edge of the field and gave birth to her, Leslie. And now she was leaving her parents' house. "Let's go home." He gave her an elbow and they headed down the road. Again, work, home, kids, every day was busy. "So, has yours settled down?" She came to visit Katie one day. "I don't know." Nobody saying anything yet, Maria looked at her. She was afraid to hear such talk. As soon as it started, it meant Archie had snooped again. No, don't look at me like that. I don't know anything," laughed the woman. Maria came home. Everything was quiet. She went to bed and wondered if it was the calm before the storm, and she was right. "Barry, isn't Daddy home yet?" she asked her son. "No," he shook his head in the negative. It was strange. Maria had been a little late at work today, filing reports, but she hadn't seen him at the factory either. She cooked dinner, fed the children. They had already gone to bed, but her father was still not home. Maria was worried about what might have happened. She threw on her coat and went to Katie's. No, she didn't want to find her husband there, just wondering where to look. "What are you doing up so late?" Her neighbor greeted her. "Archie still hasn't come home yet," Maria said excitedly. "Come in." The woman let her in. "What to do?" "I don't know what to do." She sat at Zoya's table and drank tea. "Maybe we should go to the factory. They like to get together with the men there." "No, to go there, disgrace yourself. And what if they are now in someone's shed, and I'll come?" Hello. Did not agree with her guest. "That's right too." Katie didn't know how to help at all. "I think if something had happened, you would have been told about it long ago," she summarized. "Yes, thank you." Maria hurried home, in case her husband had already arrived, and now he had lost her. But when she crossed the threshold of the lady, she realized that no one was here. She sat down at the table, put her head on her hands. Different thoughts went into her head. Maria tried several times to go to bed, because tomorrow morning she had to go to work, but she could not sleep. In the morning, Archie appeared, wearing a torn coat. "Where have you been?" His wife ran up to him. His odor was so pungent she couldn't even understand what it was. "I'm sorry, my dear." He sank down on the chair that stood there. "What for? Answer me. Where were you all night?" His wife pounded him on his back and shoulders. "Tomorrow you will find out for yourself." It was obvious that he felt bad. Maria realized that both she and her husband had to get ready for work. She went out into the yard, threw a couple of logs into the sauna stove to warm up the water a little, and then sent her husband there. He did not say anything, went quietly, washed himself. But that strange odor still did not go away. After that, his wife gave him new clothes. Then Maria woke up the children, sent them to school, and went to work, where her husband had already gone. "Maria, you are called to the assembly hall," ran an excited Mighty. "Do you know what happened?" The woman wanted to be a little prepared for what was coming. "No, I was just asked to call you." Her eyes were running. "Don't you have to be there?" Maria realized that her colleague knew something, but didn't want to talk. "I'll come back later," she said. Maria walked on wobbly legs to the place where she was called. She sat down in a chair. There were already a lot of factory workers here. The boss came on stage, greeted everyone. And now I will ask to come out those for whom we are gathered here. Maria saw that a policeman was sitting near the stage. Everything trembled inside. 3 men came through the door, Archie among them. All of them walked with droopy heads. The man in uniform stood up. These fellows had had too much to drink this night and were disorderly in the streets, he began to say. What were they doing? A question came from the audience. They were looking into the windows of the first floors, loudly discussing what they saw, and then singing songs, explained the representative of the law. And then, everyone was interested. The patrol car took everyone to the sobering up center. As soon as he said these words, the hall was filled with gasps. Well, why are you silent? Comrades, are not you ashamed to look in the eyes of your colleagues? He turned to the 3 men who stood in front of everyone. Ashamed, Archie looked furtively into the hall. He looked for his wife with his eyes. Why are you silent then? The policeman did not stop talking. We apologize and promise not to do it again, one of them said. All this is good, but you get a strict reprimand. One more such incident, and you will no longer work at this company, took the word of the chief. The trio stood with their heads down. They had nothing to say. I also know that the wife of one of you is present here. Please stand up, the policeman asked again. Maria's cheeks flamed. She couldn't get off the seat. She was so uncomfortable with the whole thing. Well, where are you? His eyes ran around the hall, looking for a woman. It's me, hello. Maria finally stood up. And how are you not ashamed? Your husband does such things. I was told that this is not his first prank. How do you put up with all this? He began to reprimand her like a little girl. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I was at work. She looked down at the floor. If this happens again, measures will be taken, the policeman said sternly. I understand you. She was ready to fall under the ground, just not to listen to all this now. Maria went to her office. The workers who passed by whispered something behind her back, but now it didn't matter. So, how did it go? Maddie was sitting in her seat. Did they talk to you? Maria asked her. She guessed how the policeman knew about his wife. No, she made big eyes. Good. Maria left the office. She was disgusted to be here. Now the feeling of shame was so strong that she just wanted to write a statement and not to appear here ever again. In the evening she came home. Her husband was already there. I'm sorry, he was sitting at the table. What are you talking about? You swear to me every time, but you repeat nonsense. And every time it brings more shame, she began to shout. I don't know why this is happening, he shrugged. How old are you? Think about it. You went through the war, you have medals, and you do this. She sank down beside him without strength. Honey, I promise. He sat like that. He didn't move. I don't care about your promises if you can't keep them. Think of your children, what they think of you. She spoke almost in a whisper. I understood. Archie didn't know what else to say to his wife. Mary came home from school once again. Mom, I've got something serious to talk to you about. He stood in front of her. Okay, talk. She looked at her son. He was as handsome as his father. I have decided that I will continue to study at the school. I want to become a military man, like Dad. He shocked her. What are you, son? She hugged him and cried. Why not? The boy didn't understand. Do you know what discipline is like there? She recalled her courses before she got to the battlefield. No worse than what you and your father went through, Barry said. The mother realized that her boy had grown up and now had an opinion of his own. Fine, do as you see fit. She was proud of the boy for making that decision. The year passed quietly. Archie got home on time every day. Maria thanked him to herself for that. Barry was preparing to enroll. His desire hadn't changed. Am I going to be alone with you? Angelique asked. What will that change? Her mother hugged her. It will be boring, the girl said sadly. Everything will be all right. The woman always supported her children in everything. The summer after Barry left, Leslie arrived. While she was away, the girl had grown up. Hi, honey, how are you? Her parents hugged her. She was fine. She averted her eyes. What's wrong? Her mother didn't understand. Mom, can I talk to you one-on-one? Asked her daughter. Of course. They retired to their room. I met a wonderful man. He looks after me. We studied together. The daughter spoke incomprehensibly. It was obvious that she was worried. It's okay. You're an adult. Maria inwardly worried about her daughter. He proposed to me, Leslie said quickly. That was the end of all dating, of course. She didn't want her daughter to experience family life and everything that came with it so early. He's coming here soon to meet you. She didn't look at her mom. For some reason, she was embarrassed. Good, and we'll meet him properly. The woman was happy that everything was happening in the open. Billy arrived 2 weeks later. He was a tall, black-haired guy. He and Leslie were very much suited to each other. I'm very happy to meet you, he said to his girlfriend's parents. And we are too. Archie gave him his hand. They sat down together at the table and started discussing when and where they were planning to get married, how they were going to study, and where they were going to live after that. The Institute has offered to give us a room after we get married, Billy said confidently. That's good. So they already have a roof over their heads. Their mother was happy for them. We'll probably have the wedding here, if you don't mind, he said. Of course not, but Leslie was going to go back and work at the local factory, and now her plans haven't changed. She asked the young man. No, I don't mind if they take me, he said, blushing. What's the big deal? 2 young specialists with higher education. Why won't they take me? The woman was surprised. Archie, what a good man our daughter got, she said to her husband in the evening. Yeah, he was looking out the window. What? He saw young girls? Maria realized. Sorry, he pulled the curtain. You need to heal. That wound has messed up your brain. She went over to him. No matter what her husband did, Maria couldn't blame him. She loved him so much she could forgive any offense. She realized that soon they would probably be grandparents, but that was only good news. Barry was writing letters saying he was doing well. Leslie and Billy were getting ready to get married. Angelica was in school. Everyone seemed to be doing well. Archie hadn't done anything like that since the sobering up incident. Now he liked to sit by the window and look out at the street. You know what I think? Maria sat down with him the other day. What? He turned to her. Billy and Leslie will get married, go away to study, and when they finish the institute and get a job at the factory, we'll get them this house. She put her head on her husband's shoulder. He did not understand. He looked at his wife with surprised eyes. Angelica will finish school by that time. She will enter. She will leave us. What are we going to do here? The woman spoke and looked at the wall. Where will we go? Archie still didn't understand her. We'll go back to the village. You know, it's nice there now, Maria said. I don't know. We'll live to see it. He turned back to the window. His wife got up and went to see what her daughter was doing. Maria was home that day. It was a day off. Billy and Leslie had gone to pick out rings. Angelica was in her room. There was a knock on the door. The woman got up, opened the door. It was the letter carrier. Maria tensed. One doesn't just knock on doors. One just drops it in the mailbox. An urgent telegram for you. He put a sheet in the woman's hands. She read it immediately. Her legs felt weak. Thank you, she said, and closed the door. Maria then walked to a chair and sat down. What happened? Her husband came through the door. He met the mailman. As if someone had hurt me, she handed her husband a paper that said her mother was dying. Let's go, Archie said confidently. That same day, the whole family, including Volodya, arrived in the village. Mom, Maria came home. It's over. The woman barely spoke. What are you saying? Cried the daughter. Sorry, the woman also cried. Grandma, Leslie and Angelica hugged her. She didn't say anything, just looked at Billy. This is my fiancé, but it looks like the wedding won't be for a while yet. Leslie couldn't hold back her tears. I've been waiting for you, the woman said. Where's your medicine? Maria asked. Over there, pointed her mother to the nightstand. Maria went over and looked. There was nothing there that could help with her illness. Mommy, she sat down directly on the floor by the bed where the woman was lying. Let's go to the hospital. No, she shook her head. I want to die at home. They spent 3 long days here. The woman was dying in agony. She was screaming so much it made everyone uncomfortable. Finally, she called out to her daughter. What is it, Mommy? Maria took her hand. I love her, was all she said, and closed her eyes. Archie, Maria wailed like a wounded animal. Calm down, he came over and picked her up off the floor and held her to him. It's my fault, she snuggled into his chest. What are you blaming yourself for? He couldn't understand. Didn't go to her as often as I should have, the woman shouted. "Mommy, calm down." Leslie and Angelica were inconsolable too. They were standing now, embraced by the whole family. Only Barry was missing. But he couldn't even make it to his grandmother's funeral. "There goes our house," Maria said lifelessly as the neighbors dispersed after the wake. "Maria, stop it. You couldn't see your wife like that, Archie." "Why, as soon as I mentioned it, she died suddenly. She knew her daughter wanted to move here." She raised her eyes red with tears to him. "It's okay. Mom loved you and never blamed you for anything. They are there now, next to your dad." Her husband spoke into her ear. They cleaned everything in the house, locked it up, and drove back to town. Billy and Leslie left the rings with their mother, their wedding delayed for a while. Their parents had suggested a winter wedding, but their daughter only wanted it in the summer. They decided that they'd come back in a year, and then they'd get married. "Mom, do you remember the dress in which you got married?" Leslie asked her. Of course, how could she forget it? "Can I wear it too?" The girl hoped for a positive answer. "Yes, here we'll go to the village. I'll take it. I'll make a new insertion," said the mother. Okay, they hugged. In a week, the couple was going to leave again to study. Now they would see each other only in the new year. Maria was bored. Now all her love was directed only to her youngest daughter. She was in and out of work. She had no interest there. She never spoke to Maddie after that moment. She made some movements towards Mary, but the woman did not react in any way. They only talked about work stuff. The story with the sobering up station was talked about until others failed and got caught in another situation. Then Archie and Maria were forgotten. They began to discuss others. The year went by without a hitch, and then Barry arrived for the vacations. His mother and father were so happy about the surprise. "We thought you'd come later," Maria said. "I just got here," he hugged his parents. Studying at the military school was not in vain. The son became more responsible. He had grown up. He had become so mature. Maria cried. Finally, they waited for Billy and Leslie. Her mother, as promised, had prepared her dress. The rings were already there. It was only necessary to decide on the place. It was decided to celebrate in a restaurant. "Isn't it expensive?" Billy asked then. "Nothing would be a pity for my daughter," the future father-in-law answered him. "Good," agreed the young man. Several people from the village were invited to the wedding. Billy and Leslie's girlfriends and friends. Maria invited Kathy, and Archie invited his few friends. It was fun. The young ones, so beautiful, sat at the head of the table. Mom and Dad congratulated. It was a shame Grandma had not lived to see this moment. "Thank you." After the feast, the young parents thanked. "What are you talking about?" Maria hugged them. Now Billy and Leslie were husband and wife. They spent a few more days at the girls' parents and went to build their life together. Barry departed as well. It was sad, but the kids were grown and they needed to be let go. "Angelica, are you ready for your prom night?" her mother asked her as the years of her high school years passed. Sure enough, Angelica had become a beauty. Her parents were proud of their daughter. Billy and Leslie were to come. They said for good, but Barry was unknown. A young man after graduating from the Suvorov school was preparing to go on. Angelica was irresistible. Her father and mother bought her a dress in which the girl shone. About the same one my grandmother once sewed for me, entered Leslie's house. Her daughter, her mother began to hug her. She hadn't seen her since last summer. The guys were in their senior year, studying for exams, practicing and writing their diplomas. "And I'm glad to see you too." Leslie stood in the aisle, not letting her husband pass. "How are you?" Their father looked at them expectantly. "Do you want to ask about the diplomas?" smiled her daughter. "What about what?" They waited with their mother. At that moment, Leslie let Billy into the house. In his hands were 2 crusts and a bottle of champagne. "Hurrah!" threw her hands up in the air at her mother. "Of course, everyone forgot about me again," said Angelica resentfully. "You what? Nobody forgot about anyone," came up and hugged her mom. "Angelica, don't be offended. We came right away to be on time for your graduation." Her sister ran up. "Thank you," she said. Everyone was preparing for the important event in the life of the youngest daughter and sister. There was no room for unnecessary talk. "Well, it's time." The father was worried, as if he had never been to the graduation of his children. "Let's go." They all left the house. The big family came to the school. where everyone had already gathered. Angelica went straight to her classmates. "She's all grown up now," Archie said. He was so happy that his children were doing well in life. They stood around a little longer, realized they were no longer needed, and went home. "Well, what about you?" They sat at the festive table and hoped that today's graduate would come home. "Let's go to the factory to settle," answered Leslie's parents. "It's good. Young minds are now at a premium," rejoiced her mother, that they did not change their choice. "Are you sure you want to be an engineer?" Archie asked. "Why do you ask? Do you doubt that I can do it?" was surprised Leslie. "Of course not. I just wanted you as a mother to sit behind a desk in the office. Maybe you'd be more useful there." He smiled. "Look, Dad, I've been coming to this for so many years that I have to listen to this now." My daughter seemed offended. Archie looked out the window. Something interested him. Again, Maria sighed. "Don't swear," Leslie asked her. Billy and Leslie did as they pleased. They took their diplomas, and together they went to apply for jobs. Just as Archie had said, they were easily accepted there. "You can stay here," their mother told them, when the young ones said they had been assigned a dormitory. "What about you?" Leslie wondered, as her father had wondered. "We have a little time left before retirement. We will work until we go to the village," the woman said. "When you go, then we will move," said the daughter with confidence. "Good," agreed the parents. And again Maria rejoiced that she gave birth and brought up worthy members of society. Angelica entered, left the parental nest. Archie and Maria were left alone. Boring sat near the window. Archie. "Nothing will move soon. There will be something for everyone to do," his wife told him. They worked quietly until they could leave. "Mom, maybe you'll think about staying?" Leslie asked her parents. "No, we have already decided everything. In the village, we will be more comfortable. What to do now here in the city? I want to start a farm, to do something. Maria has already set up to leave." Angelica was entering the medical school. She had a couple more years to study. And after that, the girl wanted to come to the village to help the local population. Her mom tried to talk her out of it, but her daughter wouldn't listen to her. "Well, why do you force her? We will have a personal doctor," laughed the father. Barry graduated from the military institute. Now he was going to go further up the career ladder. Mother and father were both proud and worried about their son. "That's it. It's time." They said goodbye to Leslie and Billy at the station. "We'll keep coming," the daughter promised. And so, after all these years, Archie and Mary were back in their village where their life together had begun. The house was strong, of course, for so many years in it, a lot of leaks. There was enough work. The man did not sit idle. And Maria, as she wanted, bought some chicks and a couple of piglets. "Well, what are they doing there?" The wife came quietly to her husband. "You're scaring me." He broke away from the hole in the hen house. "You're at it again?" The wife couldn't stop teasing him. "What? You can't even look?" He resented her. He was still ashamed of that incident. "Why not? Just open the door and look in," she was showing him. "Yeah, that way they'll see me and that's it," he disagreed. "Ah, I realized you need something to see, because when they do not know that you are watching them, they do what they want," laughed his wife. They lived happily as before, loving and supporting each other. "I'll probably go to the chairman," Archie said. "Why?" Maria didn't understand. "I'll ask for a job," he said. "Can't you stay at home?" She flung her arms around her. "Bored," Archie said. "I see." The wife turned around and went into the yard to dig the garden or to feed the pigs. "So he is bored. Give him another job." The chairman was glad the old guard was back, so he sent Archie to the farm. It was a dusty job, guarding the warehouse at night. He was glad he did. Now he had an official excuse. "You know, he came home this morning. Steve and Lucy had climbed up on the stack today and spent the night." "Why are you telling me all this?" Maria asked. Each time there were new stories. "Well, why? Who am I going to share it with?" Archie was old now, but he still had his habit of peeping. "Listen, they put you on guard, and what do?" Maria wondered. "They don't steal, but if they did, I'd show them." He showed his fist. "Oh my grief," she hugged her husband. "Mom, Dad, hi, Billy and Leslie are here for the weekend." "Oh, why didn't you tell me?" The woman hugged them. "Well, it was spontaneous. My daughter was a strict, serious lady." "Leslie, Don't you want to please your father and mother with grandchildren? They were sitting at the table. Maria thought, if a little one appears in their house, then her husband will not have so much free time. Mommy, give a little more work, asked her daughter. She liked it so much, she was in no hurry. You are almost 30 years old, sighed the woman. So what? The woman wondered. No, nothing, the mother shrugged. Angelica didn't come? The daughter asked. No, she had disappeared in the north, the father said. After graduating from the institute, the girl was assigned there. She did not refuse, and now for several years has been missing at work. She occasionally wrote to her relatives how things were going, where she was, what she was doing, and what the weather was like there. That's all. I see all the fledglings have flown away, Leslie said, tightening her lips. She knew her mother was going to bring up Barry and start crying. The boy was in Afghanistan at the moment. Mother had learned it already from the letters. He did not write when and why he was sent there, just notified on arrival there. Mom don't, saw her daughter, her chin trembled. He doesn't write to us at all, Maria said. So it's all right, the daughter took her mother's hand. Yes, a tear still could not stay on the eyelash and rolled down her cheek. Remember yourself, how do you want it to go to the front? Leslie told her. I don't want to. Maria squeezed her eyes shut. Every year she thought more and more about how her mom had felt then. And after all, she hadn't listened to anyone, just did what she wanted. Understandably, the girl got up and went outside. In the evening, everyone went to the bath. After that, there was a small feast, then the night, and in the morning the daughter and son-in-law went back. Mother and father were left alone again. Listen, today I saw the girls going to the disco, Archie said in the morning. How did you get to the club if the farm is on the outskirts of town? I just had a peep, said the husband. Oh, you can't do without your peepers, she laughed at him again. The older Archie got, the crazier his stories got. What are you saying? You've got to amuse yourself, the man answered her. Billy and Leslie arrived once again. The mother looked at her daughter and couldn't believe it. She was pregnant. Leslie, I'm so happy for you, and most of all for me. She hugged her. Mommy, is it too late? Suddenly, Leslie began to doubt. You what, it's never too late. She stroked her stomach. Now the grandparents were expecting a grandchild. They were discussing it one evening when there was a knock on the window. Who could it be? Usually no one knocks. Archie went over to look, but there was no one outside the window. Maybe a branch. Maria came up to him. What branch? I've knocked everything out for a good view. They peered into the darkness together. The door slammed behind them. Maria turned around and almost lost her senses. Barry was standing on the doorstep. It was already a real man. He was in military uniform, gray hair on his temples. His mother realized that it was not from age, but from what she had seen. Barry, she rushed over to him. Son, he's back. Hello, his father came up to him. It's been a long time since I've been here. Barry looked around. Sit down, you must be hungry. His mother pulled a chair over to him. Thank you. He sat down heavily. So tell me, what's up? The father looked at his son and couldn't believe that they were so old, if their child was so mature. Everything's fine, we're serving, just smiled at him. Wife, kids? Archie didn't know what else to ask. Yes, nodded Barry. How so? His mother almost dropped the ladle from his hands. I didn't write because she asked me to, said the son. Why aren't they with you? The woman got worried. They'll come tomorrow, he promised. Oh, so much good news lately. If only Angelica would come, we could die. She set the table and everyone sat down. Barry talked about his life. What was going on? His parents hadn't seen him in 6 years. Godson, I'm so glad. She stroked his cheek. In the morning, a pretty brunette came into the house, and with her a boy who was about 5 years old. Hi, my name is Baba Maria. She sat down in front of him. Harry, he smiled. Grandson, she pressed him against her. This is Sveta. The son introduced his wife. Here is a spy, married for so many years, has a son, and hid everything. His father wagged his finger at him. The guests stayed with the old men for a while and went to their garrison. Barry promised that if possible they would come and bring their grandson. Archie continued to keep watch over the farm, though Maria was already thinking that the chairman, in order not to offend him, had invented the job on purpose. He saw today how the boys seduce young girls, scat them, Archie told me again. Listen, I've got news for you. I had a telegram in my hand. Yes, Archie said. Leslie has a daughter. Granny smiled from ear to ear. That's a joy. Grandpa clapped his hands. Now they were expecting them to come to them soon. What did you see there again? Maria asked him. Cydia. He showed her his index finger. Young girls were walking along the road, and he liked to look at them. Oh, what a shame they wore short skirts and bright makeup. Look, what a Satsa is coming. He nodded in the direction. That's right, a Satsa, said Maria. Oh, it's Angelica. Her hands trembled. Just don't die. He remembered what she'd said when Barry was here. Angelica walked into the house. She looked fashionable, which her parents didn't like. Mommy, Daddy, she stood in the doorway. You're my sunshine. Her mom hugged her, and then she started to ask what was going on in her life and told her about her brother and sister. I'm doing well. I'm getting married. Angelica smiled. There? The father guessed. Yes, confirmed the daughter. Well, we are not destined to come, sighed the mother. Don't worry, we'll come here next summer. Angelica touched her belly. And you? Mom clutched her face. She was so happy about every news. Yeah, they hugged again. Angelica said she would spend a few weeks here and then she needed to go back. Her mother was so happy to hear that news. Maybe you'll catch Leslie too, Mother speculated. As it happened, Billy and Leslie arrived while her sister was still here. Hi, she greeted them. It couldn't be how many years, how many winters, the siblings hugged. Grandma was seeing her granddaughter for the first time. There was so much joy in everyone's eyes. But after heated conversations and sit-downs, everyone left. The house became quiet again. Don't be sad. We'll all get together again soon, Archie told his wife. Two families, Leslie and Barry and their children, came for New Year's Eve, and in the summer, as Angelica had promised, her husband and baby came with her. I thought we'd all get together, she said. Wait, they will definitely come, because we will play your wedding. Maria planned everything herself. Oh, she looked at her husband. Nothing, but you will feel what a village wedding is. Maria was happy. And so, finally, all the children and grandchildren were gathered. They put the tables in the fence, invited guests, harmonica player. The holiday was a success. Well, thank you, parents, pleased. In the morning, thanked them daughter together with her husband. You're welcome, hugged their mother. And everyone left again. Maria liked to sit by the stove. There she read, took, and did other things. Archie all sat by the window. Do you think they will come or not? Victory Day was approaching. Archie waited for his children and grandchildren to come and congratulate them. They must be busy, Maria sighed. Don't sigh, everything's fine. He watched a couple arguing outside the window. The village was growing. A new church had been built here in place of the old ruined one. Now Maria had an occupation. She went there on weekends and other holidays. Archie peeked at what the bishop was doing when no one could see him and told his wife. Don't tell me that, I won't believe it, she baptized. There was a bar in the center, near the club, where the local store used to be. Archie liked to go there. What are you doing there? His wife asked him. Look, it's interesting, he'd say. Oh, Archie, they'll knock you on the head and you'll find out, his wife warned him. Who dare? He put his finger up. You'll see, you used to be able to run away, but now you can't walk, she laughed. The children came mostly for birthdays and New Year's Eve. Sometimes they brought their grandchildren in the summer. Grandma and Grandpa were happy at those moments. Have you seen what they're building? My husband once said to his wife, Oh, what is it to you? They have now that every day. That's new, was not interested in Maria. No, I'll go and see, as is his habit. He went and sniffed everything and everywhere. Imagine a bathhouse. He came home. Aren't there enough bathhouses in the village? Maria didn't understand. I guess they're making a public one. Grandfather's eyes lit up. What are you up to, old man? She knew that look. Nothing. He turned back to the window. Maria was worried because she remembered the past. Don't worry, we'll live. We won't die, her husband reassured her. So they continued to live, each doing his own interests. The bathhouse was finished. Now young girls went there. I'm going to work, Grandpa said, and left the house. Yeah, I know your work. The old woman followed him. She saw him look around and then turn into the alley where the bathhouse was. She saw him there peeking, grinning, and rubbing his hands together. The next day, she decided to go there herself. She saw her husband asleep, got dressed, and left the house. Hello, she saw some local girls in the locker room. Good evening. They were surprised to see an old lady. Listen, my geezer is following you every night here like a movie theater, said Maria. What's wrong with you? They were surprised. I proposed to teach him a lesson and she told them the plan. As you say, the girls stood and laughed. The next time Archie said he had to go to work, Maria waited until he left because she knew where he was going anyway, and then quietly went to the same place. She went in on the other side, and so her husband wouldn't see her, winked at those inside. They understood everything and started to turn into reality the plan of Baba Maria. Oh, I wish someone would come here to steam us, said one of the girls. Yes, but not a woman, but a man, said the second. No, a young man will come, and how will we be? They reasoned. Maybe we should call some grandfather. He won't do anything to us, suggested one of them. Girls, shouted the grandfather. He came in. Who is it? They squealed. I've come to steam you. Archie never dreamed of such a thing. Take off your clothes and come in, they told him. Archie was over the moon. Now he didn't have to peek in a hole. He could see everything with his own eyes and up close. Only he took off everything as the girls ran out and whipped him with brooms. The grandfather rushed through the door as he was, and they chased him, but he had no time to turn back and ran straight through the bushes to the river. And those bushes were not ordinary bushes, but nettles. The grass was burning. He fell down so that no one could see him, but the girls were whipping him. That's enough. That's enough. Maria came up. Well, have you realized how to watch others? Now the whole village has seen you, she said to her husband. Maria, why are you like this? He almost cried. And how could I stop you from this habit? She threw things at him. Archie stayed at home for a few days. He kept his nose to the street. One day he went out for bread and saw a neighbor coming. Oh, Archie, we saw how you ran away from the girls. The whole village was laughing, how they were grooming you, he said to him. There was no need to peep. He realized that he was speaking his wife's words. At the holidays came the children. Maria took and told them about the strangeness of his father and how she taught him a lesson. The daughter laughed for a long time. They left, and the next weekend they were back again. You've been coming a lot, of course. Maria didn't mind. And we're here with presents. Leslie smiled and looked at her father. We love presents. He stood up and walked over to his daughter. We'll give them a little later. Billy is traveling somewhere with them. She passed and sat down at the table. How about a bath? The mother suggested it. I wouldn't say no, agreed the daughter. Everyone was so grown up that it was hard to believe that life had passed. When they were drinking tea, they heard a car pull up. Here came the presents. Leslie got up and went out into the yard. Billy came into the house, a large box in his hands. What's this? The mother looked at her daughter. You couldn't guess? She smiled. Is it a TV? She clapped her hands. It was. Billy had put it on the nightstand in the corner. After everything was set up, Archie began to change channels. Well, we've brought you a normal window. Now there will be someone to peep at, asked the daughter and hugged her father. Thank you. You've made it easy. He was happy. Everyone was happy now. Archie didn't move away from the box that told him all the new news. He just widened his eyes when he heard things he never would have thought of. And the shows that were on. All day and all night while the kids were at their house, Archie would stare at the screen. It's a thing. Why didn't I have it before? Grandpa used to say. But now you have it. Leslie and Billy said goodbye to their parents. Thank you for everything. The father-in-law shook his son-in-law's hand. Shall we go? He nodded his head. Where? Archie glanced at his wife. Don't be so afraid. Into the yard. He opened the door and stepped out. Where are they going? The mother asked her daughter quietly. I don't know if it was true. Billy hadn't said anything like that to her. I don't know if your wife will let you watch this or not, but I personally brought you another present for myself. Billy looked around so that the women wouldn't see and didn't go in their direction. What is it? Archie asked in a whisper. He liked such secrets between him and his son-in-law. Here, he pulled out a magazine with naked girls from under his jacket. What's this? Archie's eyes went round. Quietly, the son-in-law put his finger to his lips. Yes, yes, grandfather's eyes ran from such beauty. Billy was glad he pleased his father-in-law. Oh, son, thanks. He put the magazine in his pocket and they went back out on the porch. And what secrets have you got there? Maria asked when the children had pulled away. Look what he gave me. They entered the house, and the grandfather took out a magazine, which was full of pictures. What a shame, Maria spat, and went to see what they were showing in their new window. Darkness had always seemed to Angelica a living thing, and as long as she could remember, she knew that something lurked in it, waiting for the fateful moment, something that wanted to harm her. You are quite big now, her mother said to her, putting her to bed for the night and carefully adjusting the blanket. Don't you realize there's nothing there? It's all right here, silly, her mother said, tapping Angelica's forehead affectionately with her finger. Come on, grow up soon and nothing to be afraid of. On this inclement, thunderous night, standing in front of the window, the girl remembered her mother, who was gone a little more than a month ago. The still young woman had faded away in a matter of weeks after doctors had told her she had cancer. How had they looked it up? Nobody knew. Just Angelica's mom thought that fatigue is from work, from household chores. And now her daughter is all alone. Wrapping her arms around her shoulders, she pressed her forehead against the cold glass and stared into the darkness, the first floor of the house, and it seems that there, beyond the window, the abyss. It was well past midnight on the clock, but Angelica didn't even think about going to bed until the footsteps, the fumbling of her stepfather in the next room, were hushed. He was drunk again, and when he was drunk, Angelica was almost more afraid of him than of what lived in the dark. In fact, John had demanded that she call him Daddy from the very beginning as soon as he entered the family 4 years ago. But Angelica had never uttered the word for him. Yes, she didn't know her real father. Her mother had never told her anything about him, but John, never could he be a real daddy to her. And no amount of candy and toys and sweet words about how much he loved his girl could change that. And when he tried to give her a kindred hug, Angelica felt the grip of a snare. Angelica learned about snare, by the way, early because her grandfather kept one in his collection of antiques. Grandpa had his own room, and it always seemed to Angelica a cave of treasures. What wasn't there? Huge books, colorful rugs, strange pictures that her grandfather Robert called engravings. A big globe, not at all like the ones at school. And about the huge trap, her grandfather said it was a 19th century antique. When Angelica was little, she couldn't understand what the 19th century was. Even what her grandfather said didn't help. It was a time so long ago when even his own grandfather had been a baby. Robert also said that this trap had once been used to hunt special, magical wolves. But Mama didn't like that kind of talk. She said that because of them, Angelica would never stop being afraid of the dark. Mom sometimes even demanded to throw this thing away, saying that even though it lies on the shelf, but still somehow uncomfortable, the aura in the house is spoiled. But grandfather only waved away and said that the aura, if it is at all in nature, spoiled people, but not things with a good family history. Daughter. Stepfather's quiet voice at the door pulled Angelica out of her silent stupor. She shuddered and turned around. Angelica, open up to Daddy. You're awake. Are you afraid of a thunderstorm, little girl? The nightlight is on. There. She clenched her teeth. What kind of little girl is she to him? A week ago she turned 18. But no celebration, of course. Shortly after her mother's funeral, no wish. Just that day had passed and that was it. Her stepfather only got drunk in it again and kept repeating that time flies, and she for him will always remain a daddy's daughter who belongs only to him. In general, the stepfather said strange things when he was drunk, and when he was sober, he did strange things. For example, he loved to move things from one place to another. For example, the mug Angelica used to drink tea from in the morning, and then began to say that no, he did not touch anything. It is with her head something apparently is not so. Go away, please. I'm tired. I want to sleep. Go away, you're drunk. Angelica's voice sounded unsure. The stepfather outside the door seemed to run his fingernails over the door. No, the stepfather exhaled hoarsely and the door opened. He stepped into the room, closed the door. What are you running from me for, huh? I won't hurt my girl. The stepfather licked his lips and Angelica felt nauseous. Suddenly, his hand reached out and put out the nightlight. Small in the form of a lantern, from which on the walls danced figures of forest animals and close to the stars. It was a gift from my mother long ago, and every night burned until morning. Turn it back on. Angelica's voice trembled. She couldn't bring herself to move from her seat. No, it wasn't completely dark in the room after all. There were lights burning in the yard, and the lightning seemed to strike without ceasing. But the disappearance of the source of warm, soothing light struck a whiplash on her nerves. Afraid of the dark girl, the stepfather was getting closer. What do you want? Let's talk tomorrow. I'm tired, Anne. Do you want to go to bed, my girl? The stepfather licked his lips again and hiccuped drunkenly. Angelica gasped, her body trembling. If now to rush forward and jump out into the hallway. You can wake grandfather. He will calm him down. Grandfather, though he was already 70, was not afraid of John and always protected his daughter and granddaughter from his drunken antics. Except that the stepfather was ahead of Angelica and rushed first, right at her. He dug into her shoulders, pressed her against him, turned her around and pushed her onto the bed. Her scream froze, not breaking through the sweaty hand clamped over her mouth. What, do you think you become a big girl and can disobey your father? She's already 18, so everything is possible, popped stepfather. Angelica desperately resisted, but the forces, trivial simply by the weight of her stepfather and her, were not equal. The belt buckle jingled. Tears in the girl's eyes clouded everything around. Nightmare, darkness, the worst fears that she hadn't allowed to fully materialize in her head until now had become reality. Angelica snapped out a low, pitiful moan. But the one who hovered over her, it did not stop, only seemed to inflame even more. A big one, so muttered the stepfather in a slurred tongue. You're already out with the boys, aren't you? And Daddy then aside. Well, nothing. I'll teach you how to obey. And suddenly the door opened. The light on in the hallway illuminated the figure on the threshold. Grandpa. In an instant, he was beside her, and then some force simply yanked her stepfather off Angelica, tossed him aside like a sack of garbage. Barely, with difficulty, she realized it was her grandfather who had done it. But he always seemed so weak, and here, sitting up on the bed and correcting, returning the pajama shirt torn by a ruthless hand to her bare shoulders, Angelica opened her eyes and watched as her stepfather, who had barely begun to rise, took flight again, now against the wall. Grandfather just stamped him, and then hit him in the face with a full swing. John yelled something, tried to swing his fists back, but the forces were not equal, and in addition, he was tangled in his own pants. Finally, grandfather gave him a final, from the heart, as they call it, a blow, from which the stepfather just howled and began to roll on the floor. And the next powerful blow, grandfather clearly deprived him of his senses. Angelica, the grandfather turned to his granddaughter. Get dressed. Grandpa, she started, but the stern look immediately canceled any talk and slowness. The girl grabbed a sweater, jeans. Grandpa grabbed her stepfather by the scruff of the neck and lifted him off the floor. Not exactly carrying him, but dragging him. Grandpa, don't kill him, Angelica exclaimed. Well, what are you? Grinned the old man. Teaching enough for a start. What we will do. What are we going to do? Angelica froze. We'll leave. Right now. What? Oh, granddaughter. I should have waited for nothing. I thought maybe he would come to the senses. You see, he's lost his human face. No, we're leaving now. I've already decided where to. You obey your grandfather and pack your things. I'll call a cab and I'll lock him in the back room. He'll wake up in the morning, knock on the neighbor's balcony. He won't be lost. He'll live. Although, such a creature. With a hum, grandfather disappeared into the corridor. Angelica acted, feeling as if in a dream. Take out the bag. Leave what was at hand. Oh, how lucky that recently in the room put in order and at least did not have to look for long documents and all the necessary little things. The tears had not dried up yet, but the girl was laughing nervously. What's going on? 5 minutes ago, she was suffocating under the disgusting weight of someone else's body, and now she's packing. Where to? Why now? Anyway, she didn't want to stay in this house. Mommy, you're gone. The girl whispered and slammed the desk drawer shut, grabbing her mother's last but most precious box. It was an antique, carved thing, in which she kept memorable little things different, as she herself said. And when Angelica was just a little girl, she loved to play with them, going through them as if the contents of a treasure chest. Ready, Dragonfly? Grandpa's back. Far away in the apartment, there were drunken shouts of her stepfather, who had apparently already come to his senses and was pounding on the door, locked in the room. Instead of answering, Angelica nodded. She went out into the corridor, then to the landing. Grandfather didn't lock the front door, just closed it. Now to the elevator and down. Why are we leaving? Where to? Angelica asked when they stopped at the elevator. Robert didn't answer right away. He opened his umbrella to hide himself and his granddaughter from the rain, then stretched out his hand and caught the cold stream of water in his hand and hummed, rubbing it between his fingers. He'd been thinking about it for a long time, about how it couldn't go on like this. Robert was silent when his daughter Celine decided to get back together with John. She decided, as she said herself, tired of being a woman alone. I brought up Angelica. She will be an adult soon. She will leave and what? I will be all alone then, she said indignantly and at the same time justifying herself. Yes, I made a mistake. I made a terrible mistake. My whole life was damaged. But what am I to do now? To be alone till death? Daddy, who needs me like this? There are so many young men, and here's a stranger's child, and even stranger, with strange things. No, John's not the best man in the world, but if he isn't, I'm afraid this is my last chance. Robert didn't argue. He kept the family together for so many years. I mean, he denied his daughter the right to a private life. Where with a kind word, and where with strictness, he had convinced her that Angelica's upbringing was her main task, her duty as a good mother. He thought, so really, it will be better. A small family lived and as that, sometimes even like it seemed that they were happy. Angelica's mom was so young when her daughter was born, only 20 years old, and it was not a planned child. And the father of the daughter, it was possible to consider that there is no at all. That is, roughly speaking, biologically, of course, he existed. But in that murky, dirty, cruel story revealed enough burning truths that Selena refused any connection with this man. Only her father trusted the truth, and he, feeling immensely guilty for allowing what had happened, agreed with her. Although he sometimes realized that no, he could not have prevented it. To be more precise, he could have. If Selena had told him everything at once, instead of being alone with her misfortune. In general, the father-daughter bond could have broken, split like an iceberg under the impact of waves, but it was Angelica's appearance that became the saving glue for her. The baby gave them strength, gave their lives meaning. Angelica had been dusted off. No daycare why, when there's a grandfather who, possessing a sharp, developed mind, taught the little girl to count and write, looked after her, and along the way before he retired and after, generously spent on her most of his salary. She was his historian and culturologist, specializing in folklore, not that great, but with what the accountant received Selena for the needs of the family was enough. Angelica grew up a quiet, domestic child. She went to school, but she did not make many new friends. In general, with her and in the yard drove few people. Not because of her odd fear of the dark and a sensitive attitude to the fact that sometimes count the surrounding objects were so noticeable, no, about it only the closest knew. Simply Angelica was very timid, shy, did not show initiative in games, but she studied well. She obeyed her mother, and Mom was quite happy with that. She only sometimes regretted that there is no in her daughter a bright palette of emotions, that fire that happens in other children. But then every time mentally said to herself that even be happy about it should be. Maybe the daughter of her mistakes will not repeat. I wish Angelica never had to go through what she went through in her time. Grandfather Robert also saw how his granddaughter was growing up, but it did not bother him in the least, because he noticed something else. Angelica was so sensible and intelligent beyond her years. So what if she doesn't run around the yard with the other kids, but as Peanuts cracking tasks from math and physics textbooks, eagerly argues with him, an old man about the deep meanings of the legends of Eastern Europe, and by heart can retell the most important dates in the history of Constantinople? not forgetting all the names of important persons of that time. Sometimes the granddaughter talked to her grandfather about the future, about what she wants to become, and every time she kept saying that she wants to be like him, also to study history, culture, folklore. "Wouldn't you get bored?" Robert asked with a sly squint. "It's more work in the office. It's not an adventure with treasures, as in the movies." "But it's interesting," answered Angelica invariably. "And you can work very much alone." "What are you? You do not like human society. Are you a bear, which and alone in the wilderness of the forest is good?" once asked his grandfather. "And if I am a bear," replied Angelica, "he is big. No one will hurt him." "No, grandfather, I love people. It's just, I think I'm something else." "You're the only one," Robert grinned, "and the best granddaughter I've ever had. And that, believe me, is even more important than science. And even if you become a fool and forget your alphabet and your name, I will always and always love you." Much later, looking back, Robert thought that he would not have allowed that Selena got together with John. But as if an evil fate, then Robert spent almost 2 months in the hospital, first finding himself there with pneumonia, and then, on the eve of discharge, had a heart attack. And when he returned to the apartment, it turned out that Selena not only brought a man, but also had time to sign with him. And she was determined that this was her last chance at womanhood, and she demanded that John be registered in the apartment. She said that if she didn't, she'd leave. She'd pack up her things and her daughter, and she and her husband would leave. Robert, with a broken heart, agreed to everything, but he kept an eye on his son-in-law. Scolded him when he drank in the first years. John as if obeyed. He worked, however, in different places, then a loader, then a guard at the warehouse. But Selena blossomed with him. She started wearing makeup and dresses, cooked a delicious dinner for the return of the spouse because she worked near the house and had time to patronize. Selena never tired of talking about how happy she was. Robert, after his illness, when one led to the other, suddenly began to feel guilty. That because of the long-standing fatal disobedience of his daughter and a keen desire to take care of his granddaughter, condemned Selena to a lonely woman's life. Robert had repeatedly told John that he was a stranger here and had no right to bring up Angelica, in general should not get too close to her. "What are you going to do to me, old man?" John snapped at him. "You yourself will fall apart soon. You don't get out of hospitals." Actually, that was only half true. Robert was really old. He tried to take care of his health. He was a head taller than his son-in-law, broader than him in the shoulders, and in principle, he never complained of feeling ill after he came out of the hospital. Robert always believed that men in their family were strong. His own great-grandfather had lived until he was 104 years old and had kept a large farm in the village until the last, commanding everyone so that even the mice went on a string. Robert did not run himself, ate without excesses. Morning began with exercise and even went to the gym, bought a subscription. Which, by the way, very funny, Selena. If you want your father to be an old man, then I'm sorry, my daughter, there will be no such thing. Yes, he's sick, like all people. But is that a reason to suddenly abandon yourself? Time passed, and one day Robert realized no. John was looking at Angelica for a reason. The bastard suddenly began to throw phrases that here she will be 18, will be a bride, will be a girl in the very juice, and it must, therefore, from the grooms to protect. Robert could not listen to how Selena takes these speeches as a joke, even happy that stepfather, you see, ready in advance to protect the honor of stepdaughter. When it became clear that Selena is sick, Robert suggested let's sell the apartment, start treatment. He also offered to sell his house in the village, but she was against it. "No, I can't do that to Angelica. This is her future. She needs a good place to live. And me, I guess it's my time. I guess it's for the way I used to be." Robert felt like hitting her for the only time in his life, just to slap her so she'd come to her senses and stop talking nonsense, because he'd long ago decided for himself that what had happened wasn't Selena's fault. She was just too young. She didn't go to anyone for help. They could have just left, fled to the city, and then, after his daughter's death, the only reason Robert didn't collapse into the black abyss of despair was because he knew Angelica needed his help. He realized that with John further to live under the same roof, they cannot. He was not ashamed to drink at home, and on all attempts to talk shouted that he was in grief and in general he was registered here. Robert decided to do otherwise to move out, taking Angelica with him of course, and then already sell the apartment. Slowly began to learn everything, and the place where to leave, prepared. But here's how it all turned out, that I had to hurry. And now when they were standing at the entrance, all these events and decisions of the past flashed before their eyes. Grandpa, where are we going? Maybe we should go back in. Okay, Dragonfly, listen to me. Robert turned to his granddaughter and put his hand on her shoulder. I thought I'd tell you everything later, well, as it is now. We can no longer live with this man. You yourself, a big girl, should realize what he's like. I'm an old man, of course, but I'll take care of you. There's a place where we can stay while we decide everything. We'll leave town. Grandpa, what about it? I have to prepare to enter next year. What about me? There's a library in town. Angelica did not realize that her thoughts were occupied with such trivial matters of the future, but they rose up in her mind like a barrier protecting her from the aftertaste of the attack. You will, Robert answered. The time is September. You'll have plenty of time to get ready for admission. I'm sorry, Dragonfly, he added more quietly. I should have taken you away earlier. The old fool. I kept thinking that I had to finish this and that. To hell with everything, just to keep you safe. It's not your fault, Grandpa. Angelica's voice trembled. Why did Mom bring him? He's your mom just loved and did not listen to her mind. It happens in life. Well, granddaughter, do not cry. I want to go back and unscrew his head. Angelica sobbed and hugged her grandfather. Don't. Let's really just go away, even to the end of the world. And where are we going? To your friends? No, Dragonfly. We'll go to my small homeland, to the village of boars. Ooh, that's all the girl could say. She would have been less surprised if her grandfather had said that they were going, say, to Paris. Angelica knew that this village was somewhere far away, but she had never been there. Her grandfather had once told her, when she was still a little girl, about those places, about how free and beautiful it was there. But then Mom heard it and yelled at Grandpa. She said she shouldn't tell her daughter about it. She'd had enough of that damn place. But it was such vague, ancient memories, and Angelica did not ask anything about it now. The abominable attack of her stepfather had put the girl into some sort of trance. She was now ready for anything, just to be away from here. Finally, a cab pulled up. The driver, a chatty and smiling guy who introduced himself as Vasily, loaded the passengers' things and under the story about what an unusual shift he had today, took them to the station. And the owner of the pug said to me, "Don't worry, we are calm today." What does he do when he's not calm? I do not envy her husband. Gibbered the guy, carefully taking a place in the parking lot. That's it, here we are. What time is the train there? We'll make it, answered Robert, counting out the bills with a bounty for the trip and for tea. Grandpa, have you bought tickets already? Angelica was surprised. No, but the nearest one is leaving. Robert glanced at his wristwatch. In 3 hours, if there are no tickets for it, then we'll go next. Grandpa, will he be looking for us? Who knows? But don't be afraid, smiled the old man. I won't let him hurt you. Now let's get to the boars, rest, and slowly get on with our lives. Look, Dragonfly, there's a 24-hour buffet. What do you say about the pies? Unhealthy, fried, but tasty. I will, smiled Angelica. Luckily, the train tickets were available. Robert paid for a whole compartment at once so that not a single living soul would not interfere with the journey. Unfortunately, we don't have grilled chicken and boiled eggs, but there is a restaurant car, so we won't starve. Give me that bag, granddaughter. Careful, put it here. Something jingled in the bag. Robert carefully placed it. Angelica frowned. It felt like a box. Grandfather, is there a trap in there? Robert nodded. Grandpa, you told Mom you were going to throw it out. Yeah, that came out badly, but that memory is mine. That trap? What's that? Oh, Dragonfly? I'll tell you later, but for now, he doesn't ask for food and drink, and he won't jump out from under the shelf, won't bite, right? So forget him for now, forget him. Let's better make the bed and you go to sleep, or look, quite sleepy eyes. Angelica agreed. Now, under the measured clatter of wheels, when with every moment the train carried away farther and farther, she suddenly felt so tired. Still, however, wanted to wash to wipe with a washcloth all traces of touching stepfather. But now it was impossible, and therefore could wait. Early in the morning, when the dawn was already dawning, grandfather woke Angelica to admire the view outside the window. It was really a breathtaking sight. The train was rushing past the river, on a vast meadow in front of which cows were grazing. Summer was running, flying to the end, and the cattle were walking on the last succulent grasses. A little later, they took tea and breakfast was served by the conductor, and Angelica plunged into what she loved more than anything else in the world, grandfather's story. He told her what they would soon pass by, and then the view of a half-station or some village acquired a special, deep, and fascinating meaning. "What are we going to do there, grandfather?" "To live, granddaughter. We've spent too long in the city, and you've never seen anything but it in your life. I have a house there." "A real one?" Angelica gasped. "Well, not a toy," Robert grinned. "It was built more than a century ago. It has a solid piece of land. True, almost everything stood unattended." "What do you mean, almost?" "Well, there were people to keep an eye on things so they didn't fall apart. But all in all, we'll live in a wilderness, granddaughter. But believe me, that's what will do our hearts good now." The road took a long time. Sometimes we went out at small stations to stretch our legs. And also, grandfather always bought something to fried seeds or homemade dry fish. Angelica tried it all with apprehension, and even tears. Mom would not approve cooked by unknown person. Unknown in what conditions? But Angelica also believed her favorite grandfather. "Grandpa, well, what kind of village is this?" Angelica said in surprise, diving out of the screen of the smartphone, in which she had been sitting for the last half an hour. "Almost a city already." "Yes, the Boers have changed, but fortunately, civilization is slowly coming, and the spirit of the old, as they call it, lives." "And you, what are you? Quite urban at me." "What else?" Angelica shrugged her shoulders. "Ed, that's what I mean. Consider, the real life has not seen." "No, I should have been more determined, and at least sometimes to bring you. Look, and would not have grown up such a boo." Sending her grandfather a smile that understood his joke, Angelica returned to the information she was studying. In general, it was very interesting. The first settlements on the place of Kabankiki appeared at least 400 years ago, and still in these parts remained a lot of architectural monuments of the 19th and even 18th centuries. The house of the merchant Volkov now turned into a museum, where the objects of old times and some archaeological finds were demonstrated. Not far from the village, the reserved territories began, and probably, as it was said in one of the articles, it was the proximity of truly untouched nature that explained the fact that the forests were not reserved, but the most ordinary, almost adjacent to the Kabankiki, were so unmodern. In other words, they were happy in the proper seasons with an abundance of berries and mushrooms, and there were also all sorts of animals: hares, martens, and even moose, and someone said wolves. In the latter, however, the journalist who wrote the article doubted very much and specified that wolves had not been officially seen in these parts for 100 years, so that all these stories were no more true than the rumors about werewolves that had been going around in Kabanchiki for ages. "Grandpa, is there a fence at our house?" Angelica suddenly asked. "There is a good fence. It's good enough to keep out strange cattle." "Are the doors and windows locked?" "Why do you ask, granddaughter? Are you afraid of robbers?" Playing mysteriously with his eyebrows, grandfather asked, and Angelica smiled involuntarily. "It's just that we will live alone. Don't be afraid. Outside bandits don't climb there. Thieves too in Kabankiki. There are no for about 30 years. Why? If you know too much, the martens will take you to the forest." Grandfather said something incomprehensible and wagged his finger at his granddaughter. Angelica shrugged her shoulders and changed her occupation, though she had few people who could be called friends in the city, and it was necessary, of course, to inform them that she had left. At last the train stopped. The usual fuss began to take things, check that nothing had been forgotten, and come back for what had been forgotten. Then we waited for the bus, and having mixed up a little, almost went in the opposite direction. In short, by the time we finally reached Kabanchiki, Angelica felt tired. But of course she looked at the sides, at what opened her eyes. It was hard to say that it was a village if we were to be guided by a classical idea of it. Asphalted road, modern buildings, post office, stores. In the distance could be seen the roofs of solid such houses. Robert explained that it was squeezed into the territory of Cabanchique cottage village, like a cottage, but with a considerable number of such properties in which they live all year round. But soon all this was left aside. The air was fresh and possibly fragrant, filled with the aroma of meadow grasses. The wind carried the freshness of the river and the distant mooing of cows. Angelica suggested taking the cab when they first got off the bus, but Robert said it was ridiculous to walk 5 minutes. But it must have been half an hour, and with the way the luggage was dragging their hands, it seemed like an eternity. They passed all the houses in the village. Angelica felt strange, because they did not stare at them, but some of the old men suddenly began to say something to others at their appearance. Angelica suddenly thought about the fact that her grandfather never really told about his past life. That is, about the time before he moved to the city, and it now seemed strange. After all, with Robert, it seems, granddaughter about everything in the world could communicate. So why wasn't this period of his life covered? I could not believe that his grandfather had nothing to tell about his youth, but what he told was scraps. As if from the ancient story torn out pieces, erased some of the words and so presented, and unclear to you and curious to the horror of what is there, in fact, what is there. "Wow, Grandpa, is that your house?" marveled Angelica, when finally they got out of the village, or rather left the last of its houses a few hundred meters behind them. Grandfather and granddaughter stopped in front of a 2-story brick house with a tile, once must have been red, but now lost the richness of color roof. The windows were boarded up. The paint had peeled off on the walls, revealing the brickwork. The girl thought suddenly that the house looked like a huge, lying in hibernation beast. A long period of idleness had made it quite heavy, clumsy, and the fur on its sides had piled up, in some places falling out, exposing the base of the hide. What nonsense comes to mind sometimes. Shaking her head and shrugging her shoulders, Angelica approached the wrought iron fence, covered with some greenery, touched the black bars with her fingers. It seemed that it had been painted at least last year. Otherwise, it would have rusted for so many years. There was a shrill, howling squeak. Grandfather opened the lock on the gate and now with effort pushed it forward, opening it. "Welcome to our domain," he said importantly to his granddaughter, lifting his hat above his head. Grandfather had always, for as long as Angelica could remember, loved hats, and in summer he always wore light-colored sailcloth hats, which made him, together with his neat beard and mustache, look like an ancient professor. This resemblance, by the way, even did not spoil the habit of grandfather to wear under suits not shirts with ties, and t-shirts from youth stores bright, with bold prints and bold inscriptions. The porch of the house inspired apprehension, but it didn't fail when Angelica climbed it. It was her turn to unlock the doors, and they creaked open with an equally shrill creak. "Oh, what a mess." Robert shook his head. "I'm going to have to work here." "Is there heating?" Angelica asked, suddenly worried about the comfort of her new home. "From the boiler in the basement. I bought a new boiler 3 years ago, but it was idle." The girl only shook her head. It was surprising and strange that the grandfather cared so much about the place where no one lived for many years, in which they did not even go on vacation. True, now it became clear that when grandfather left, as he said, on business, he probably came here to see how the house was. A spacious hallway with a wide staircase going to the second floor created the illusion that the house was much more spacious than it seemed from the outside. "Cylinder. Grandpa, the village shops are over. That's the old name," shyly corrected him Angelica. "Well, to the store. The essence is the same. Everything can be bought." The kitchen slightly frightened Angelica. Gas stoves seemed to her in principle beasts incomprehensible in handling. And the place was so dirty. "Yes, we need to clean well," as if her grandfather read her thoughts. "So that we do not suffer. I'll bring tomorrow a worker from the village will help us. Come on, I'll show you the living room." "Grandpa, it's just like in a museum," aghast the girl, when from the furniture were pulled down accompanied by rising clouds of dust, which had become white and beige from time, cloth covers. Angelica had noticed even earlier that inside the house looked very old-fashioned. Under the ceilings, there was fanciful molding with bunches of grapes and some figures of either people or animals. And now the furniture was found, natural wood, it seems. The girl ran her fingertips over the lacquered surface, sighed, unthinkable, and all this beauty was idle for years. She even felt sorry for the house. It was a strange thought, but Angelica thought that if it was not just a building, but a living being, it would probably be a shame for it to exist alone like this without owners. Is the fireplace real? I asked my grandfather, and he answered with a nod. Then we went to the second floor, where according to Robert there were living rooms, and a couple of guest rooms, and also a study. Well, let's take these, the old man decided, showing his granddaughter the two rooms next to each other. And although he said nothing, it seemed to her that her room had once belonged to a woman. It was indicated by the look of the bed. Its four posts were covered with carvings with floral ornaments, and there was a table with a triple mirror against the wall. The girl wrinkled her nose at the wallpaper, which must have come from the 50s, but in this room on the wall by the bed, it was literally falling off, and it was clumping up alarmingly. But since she was going to live here now, or rather live here for a while, she had to put up with everything. And to get used to it, Angelica decided to put some of her things in the room as soon as possible. Her mother's jewelry box on the table with mirrors, her favorite nightlight on the bedside table. The girl froze. Then she rummaged through her bag once more. The nightlight was gone. No, it was not lost. She left it in the room of the city apartment. Forgot. Oh, dragonfly. Like a little girl, honestly. Sighed grandfather when Angelica shared her sadness with him. But it's not good to sleep with the light. Grandfather, please don't start, Angelica said, almost crying. She herself realized how stupid it is, 18 years old already and afraid of the dark, but she couldn't help herself. I'm not swearing. Robert waved his hands. It's nothing like that. Before, in the old days, even adults were afraid of the dark. It was normal, especially in villages like this one. He added more quietly, and then hugged his granddaughter. Well, keep the phone on at night. Put it on the nightstand. I'll look in the village shop tomorrow. Maybe they have lamps, or you could light a candle. No. Angelica calmed down and even smiled. I don't want a candle. What if there's a fire? And in the old days, how did they live with them, eh? And nothing did not burn everything and everywhere. So then, probably skillfully. That's right, Robert nodded. In the old days, we lived without the internet, but in many ways we were smart, and in some ways we understood more than we do today. Well, now that we've looked around, granddaughter, let's walk back to the village and get something for dinner. I'd order sushi too. Grandpa added in a hooligan tone. But I'm afraid the delivery zone doesn't extend to the Boers. You should get some rest, Grandpa. Angelica hated to be weak. After all, she's so young and Grandpa's old. Why don't I go? You just write down what to buy. Okay, you agree? Before going to the store, still found out that the water supply in the house again has heating from the boiler, and in principle the quality of water is not frightening. So Angelica went shopping almost in a good mood. It was nice and strange at the same time to walk along the empty road, listening to the silence. No, of course, the silence was not absolute, but against the background of the city noise seemed just fantastic. As it turned out, there were several stores in Kapanchiki, but Angelica was lucky to go straight to the largest one, where everything on the list was available, and also, to her delight, nightlights were available. Angelica chose the one in the shape of a bear in linden pink color. The saleswoman behind the counter did not interfere with questions, but still asked if it was true that Robert had returned. They said they saw him, walking towards the manor. Well, Angelica stretched out, not really knowing what to say. We won't be long. To rest. Fine, said the saleswoman and looked at her strangely. Give him a bow from us Siderobs, and tell him the walkers still live here too. And the Stones remember. I will, Angelica rounded her eyes. She hadn't expected her grandfather to be such a famous person, but apparently just lived here his peers, and maybe he wrote them letters. Finally, loaded with bags, Angelica went outside. The sun was slipping towards sunset, having changed the gold of light to a soft crimson tone. The girl was suddenly touched by the thought that dusk would soon come. Surely she would make it back before they did. How annoyed she was with her own silly, groundless fears. The road home was winding ahead in a ribbon. Angelica passed a woman with a full basket, by the look of the early mushroom harvest, and the girl made a note in her mind to offer her grandfather to go mushrooming. 4 goats also passed by. The animals kept in a flock and drove them barefooted boy, who paid no attention to the new resident of Cabanchique, too absorbed in the fact that not to let run away his small herd, and in addition still hummed under his nose some song. "Girl, do you need a ride?" The rustle of tires of the car approaching from the back and the voice of the guy who stuck out from the driver's seat took Angelica out of the state of pleasant, almost meditative thoughtfulness. "No, thank you," she replied politely and even smiled, and quickened her step a little. Not that Angelica was afraid, but it was somehow unpleasant when you are alone on the road, the darkness is getting closer, and behind you a car with 4 strange men crawls. "What are you doing?" One of the guys in the back nodded. "Hop in, we'll give you a ride." "Are you afraid?" The driver grinned. "Why so? Are you a city girl?" Angelica shuddered. "Only this is not enough. What to do now?" "Turn around and go back to the village where people are. Drop the heavy bags and run." "Hey, what's the big deal?" A new participant in the events unfolding in the dwindling twilight approached from the direction of the village, just like the car, but on a bicycle. It was a tall, blonde-haired guy wearing glasses with round, old-fashioned glasses, and Angelica, though the situation did not dispose to the thoughts of outsiders, but thought that he looked something like a student from the old Soviet movies that her grandfather liked to watch. Even dressed similarly, plaid shirt, vest on top, but the jeans and sneakers, of course, are quite a modern detail. "Hi, Alexander," gritted his teeth and averted his eyes the guy who was in the driver's seat of the car. "Nah, just offering a ride." Well, the blonde grinned and slowed down completely, stopped the bike, so that he was exactly between the car and Angelica. "Would you ride?" "Come on." Another guy from the car spoke up. "We didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry." "All right, let's go, guys." And the next moment, the driver hit the gas and the car sped forward, and there, a lot farther on, turned at a fork, now heading somewhere towards the city, like somewhere. "Is everything all right?" The blonde turned to Angelica. "Thank you," she smiled. "Yes, you saved me." "No," he replied. "It's Max and his friends, they're locals. Hooligans, of course, but generally harmless guys. But their company seems to have frightened you." "If only a little. I really recently came here, only today. I came with my grandfather." Completely dared to communicate with the stranger Angelica and waved her hand, pointing to their house. "That's where we live." "Oh, so Robert's back," the boy said thoughtfully and sent Angelica a very strange look. "May I offer the chivalric services of a chaperone? We're kind of safe here in general, but still, I wouldn't want to interfere with your plans," Angelica said in a hurry and blushed embarrassed. "You're not interfering because I'm just out for a walk," the blonde replied. "I'll help with the bags at the same time." He patted the basket on the bike rack with his hand. "Thank you," Angelica agreed, still embarrassed. "If it really doesn't bother you. By the way, we haven't introduced ourselves." He held out his hand to her. "Alexander." "Angelica," answered the girl. The handshake was firm, and so they moved forward. They started talking, so about insignificant trifles, but by the time they reached the gate of the house, Angelica for some reason began to feel that she knew Alexander a long time ago. She opened the gate, expecting him to drive forward, but the guy stopped in front of them, unloaded the bags, returning them to the owner. "Maybe," Angelica swallowed nervously. "Would you come in to see us? You know, to say hello to Grandpa and have a cup of tea." "Thanks, but no. I have to go," answered the guy and looked very strange again. "Well, okay," shrugged Angelica. "Bye then. See you later." The guy replied and turned his bike around and rode back. Angelica decided not to tell her grandfather anything, because in fact, nothing particularly important or interesting had happened. They hastily prepared dinner sandwiches, drank tea with cookies, and went to bed. Angelica slept unexpectedly well at the new place. She had a wonderful dream, which was equally frightening and exciting because usually the girl saw something ordinary, a repetition of her everyday life, their routine. But here she was in the village, or rather in the yard of their house. Late autumn was raining on the trees left rare, brown, and dried, disturbing rustling leaves. Angelica stood in the yard, dressed only in a light dress, more suitable for the warm days of the passing summer. She stood and was afraid to turn to the house, because she knew inside none of the rooms no lights were on and something was watching her from the windows. Something big and evil. And then behind the gate, which opened by itself, as if under the hand of a ghost, there was a big dog. Black with silver fur, it grinned suddenly, and Angelica realized it was not just a dog. There was something of a wolf in it. The beast was formidable, but the girl knew for sure he would not offend. And then what was in the house? A dirty fog crept onto the porch, and the sky darkened sharply, twitched with storm clouds, and the air smelled her proximity. But the wind also dryly drove the leaves, did not spill a drop. Angelica took a step forward, another, snapped at a run in terror, realizing that what is in the house is already reaching for her, is about to grab. She fell, pain hit her knees. She stretched her hands forward in despair, and her fingers sank into the thick, warm fur, and her gaze met the yellow eyes of the dog, in the depths of which smoldered red coals. The beast radiated strength, aggression, and hunger, but it did not want to hurt her. Angelica somehow knew that he wanted to save her, except he couldn't. Please, it was the kind of dream where you scream, tearing your voice, but barely a whisper comes out. Let me in, the wolf answered, his voice somehow sounding like the roar of a beast, and a young man on a bicycle at the same time, rang out right at the girl's head. I can't, said the wolf. First you have to invite me in. Angelica had already opened her mouth to say the cherished words, but then the fog caught up with her. It touched her ankles and yanked her back, and her stepfather's nasty voice sounded behind her. There you are, my girl. Angelica woke up, jumping up in bed and gasping for breath. Outside the window was a clear, golden dawn. The house became noticeably cooler. Probably it was worth adding heating. Pulling her knees to herself and wrapping her arms around them, the girl squeezed her eyes shut and shook her head, as if finally shaking off the dream. What a dream! In the morning, grandfather announced that he was going shopping, and also for an assistant. No need, Angelica said. I can do it myself. You think, Dragonfly? You're a hard-working bee, and you know how to do everything, but there are a lot of worries here. Nothing, the girl answered cheerfully. There will be something to do. Will you be back quickly? Maybe we can go to the woods later for mushrooms. That's a good idea, smiled the grandfather. We'll do that. By the time he returned, Angelica, of course, had not managed to do everything, but still the most necessary rooms were cleaner. We went to the forest. It was fun, especially when the grandfather began to strictly correct his granddaughter's clothes, as it should be, to ensure that no gnats or ticks did not bite. Angelica had a very vague idea of the mushroom variety in the wilderness, and so grandfather's detailed story about what you can eat here and what not, accompanied by all sorts of simply curious facts, came just right. Grandpa also told a little about the locals, and Angelica decided to open up about what happened yesterday. I don't know Alexander at all. Robert shook his head. But I think we should invite him to tea, if only as a courtesy. Tell him if you see me insisting. We walked in the forest until late afternoon, and there we had another snack of sandwiches and coffee from a thermos. They unanimously decided to have dinner with mushrooms and fried them with potatoes. Angelica's grandfather didn't let her do it. He said that there are dishes that he, doesn't trust anyone. At dinner, we did not utter a word. Too tasty, everything was too delicious, impossible to distract. But then, when grandfather, again without any help, brewed a fragrant tea, it was time to talk. Robert told his granddaughter that they had come, of course, to rest. But it was also time to seriously deal with his life. I think it's time for you to learn something about our family and why your mother has been alone for so long. Perhaps I should have told you about it sooner, but I once made a vow to Celine not to tell you anything. But I think that was a mistake. I'll be honest, granddaughter, I feel like I'm betraying my daughter's memory, but I can't keep quiet. There are things you can let go of, but you must know. And we'll start from afar. It turned out that the ancestors of Angelica's family on her mother's side were scientists, at least in 4 generations, and all of them attracted not exact sciences, but history, literature, folklore. Therefore, in many ways they were happy to take in the family of Angelica's grandfather because he did the same thing. Angelica's great-grandmother on her mother's side was, as it became fashionable to say in the modern world, psychic, and it brought her fame, but not particularly good. But personal happiness was not. In the end, this intelligent and talented woman, as Robert said, went crazy. Your mother was under the impression that this was not the first woman in your family named who, shall we say, had peculiarities of consciousness. Your aunt. Well, what's an aunt? My grandmother's next of kin, let's call her that, was sleepwalking. My wife, that is, your grandmother, she was afraid of water since childhood, and you know what fortune tellers told her? That she had drowned in a previous life, and she so believed that, so sorry for the details, but even the bath refused to take, and our vacation, if we went to the sea, turned into an unbelievable thing. She wouldn't even wet her feet. Grandfather, cautiously, fearfully even asked Angelica, "Do you think I'm afraid of the dark because I'm going crazy?" "No, well, what do you mean?" The old man was indignant. "It's just that you're an impressionable person. But I'm afraid some inclinations in women of our kind still have. Only, Angelica, here, I beg you, do not think that you go crazy. Rather, I repeat, you are extremely impressionable nature. And you in life contraindicated strong emotional shocks. And also, by the way, if you believe what went among the women of our family, you may have the gift of a psychic, a seer. I wouldn't want that." Angelica shrugged shakily, though the room was very warm. "What happened to Mom?" "And with her, dear, what happened is this. And again, I'm sorry that you have to learn all this. Your mom fell in love with a man when she graduated. It was clearly a hopeless case. But she decided that he was a man destined by fate. I was ill with something like asthma at that time. And since I had the opportunity, I decided to move to the countryside to improve my health. At the same time, I began to teach the locals here. That is, there was a school here, everything. But I gave lessons, was, let's say, a tutor in history. I like to collect local folklore. I'd even thought at one time to find treasure, according to legends buried here somewhere. And you can imagine, we found it. A pot with ancient coins. As I remember now, the reward was divided among everyone honestly. Oh, we had a week's walk then. Anyway, we came here. Selena was very sad that she left her beloved. But here's how it turned out. He was married and his wife was pregnant. So Selena decided to do the old-fashioned love spell, and she chose Aleftina as her assistant. We had such an old woman here, a mean one. She persuaded Selena to go to the forest at night, to the swamp, and there to do something dark. In general, when we returned to the city, the man himself began to run after Selena. I was worried about my daughter. Why did he change his mind about his love? And it turned out that he had a misfortune in the family. Wife lost a baby and doctors said that they will not have any more children. So he was probably looking for her replacement. Only the temper they had with Selena were not alike at all, and he began to swear at her often, offended. And then it turned out that he has another friend and here she is pregnant. Apparently, he was still when with his wife everything was fine, had an affair on the side. In general, he left my Selena. Oh, how many tears she shed for him. I thought that here, the next summer when we came here, then rest, fresh air will heal her. But I was wrong. Selena got it into her head that it was because of her sorcery that her wife lost her beloved child. I told her that this nonsense is rare, but she did not listen and kept saying that she would be punished for this. Karma would catch up with her. The time was not easy then, granddaughter. Not the heart of the 90s, of course, but in some places they were still on their feet. Bandits. Anyway, cottages were already being built in Kabankiki. Those who were richer were vacationing. And it so happened that my Selena started to go to the forest. The same Aleftina advised her, of course, not for free. Some rituals to remove the consequences of the spell. And one day Selena ran into bandits in the woods. They were having some kind of showdown. In general, it was a bad business, but it so happened that the leader liked her. He said he'd let her go anyway, she had to lie down with him so he could pretend she wasn't there, so that he'd quiet his men who were afraid she'd tell someone what she'd seen. Here, she went to this man for several days. More precisely, she ran away in the evenings and came back in the morning. She revealed herself to me when they were already back in town, and it became clear that she was expecting a child. That's how, granddaughter, you appeared. Angelica listened, and it seemed to her that grandfather, of course, about another person, because, well, it could not all relate to her favorite mother, to herself. But the realization that it was true and it was all about her, her family, still came over her. Robert paused and then, reading from his granddaughter's look that she understood everything, continued. He tried to find that man, but it turned out that the leader had run away. Someone had gotten into a fight, and he had to flee. And Celine told him not to look, not to anger. Angelica was tormented by ambivalent feelings that night. On the one hand, she realized how important it was to understand what was happening to her mother. But on the other hand, now she knew for sure that her life would never be the same again. And it seemed that now there was something in her that confused everything even more, pushing her somewhere forward, into the darkness. The next day, grandfather said that he would be very busy. He had to call his friends in the city, who promised to find a good realtor, and also to send some documents on the apartment to slowly start a big deal to sell it. Not now, of course, but later, when the inheritance will all work out. But we have to start now. And what should I do? Angelica sighed. Oh, dragonfly. Really like a little. Well, think of a case. There you can continue to clean the house, you can cook dinner. Robert curled his fingers, enumerating, but then, seeing the upset face of his granddaughter, decided to give another idea. Better yet, go to the library. It's a good one here. Here, now I'll write you a list of books to look at there. I'm thinking of writing a book on local folklore. So you, look and bring these. Such a case could not be called particularly exciting. But firstly, Angelica, it seemed much more interesting than sitting at home. And secondly, the girl mentally again scolded herself for the fact that even ranted. And so she decided to bring what her grandfather needed. And as soon as he came back, to do, in fact, lunch. The library turned out to be exactly as Angelica had expected, small but very cozy. The smell of books was joined by the scent of fresh wood, recently renovated. When she had finished with the formalities of signing in as a new reader, Angelica wandered among the shelves, stopping occasionally to take down a book, open it, and then put it back. She didn't feel like reading at all, so she decided to just quickly pick up whatever her grandfather had told her to bring. Ouch, said the girl when she pulled one of the books, but it did not yield. Then she pulled harder and the volume slipped off the shelf, and behind it was found a man, so it happened by chance that at the same time they wanted to take the same copy. Hello, said Angelica and smiled, because the other visitor in the empty library at that hour was Alexander. It seems that we have already changed to the first name, he smiled. Yes, Artie, I'm sorry. The girl was completely confused and hastily handed him a book. Take it. I think you were the first to take it. It's okay, he refused. I was just looking for something to read on local legends, and you seem to be collecting a list, he nodded, his eyes pointing at the sheet clutched in Angelica's hand. My grandfather sent me. And what do you need it for? For myself, for the book. Are you a historian too? Angelica was surprised. No, I'm a writer, and I'm working on something. I decided not to waste time while I'm resting here. Maybe. Can you recommend some literature? I'm looking for a werewolf book. That's for Grandpa, Angelica answered immediately. I don't read that kind of stuff. I don't like horror stories. Oh, you're missing a lot, Alexander winked. It is natural in human nature to strive for safe fear, and that's what we experience when we read appropriate literature or watch movies. No, confidently continued to refuse Angelica. I somehow and in life, she awkwardly coughed. By the way, and maybe, really, on Tito has come over. Maybe, the guy seemed to answer simply, but there was something infinitely stubborn in his voice, as if he was never going to come to visit. But he did come. That same day, he showed up at 7 o'clock in the evening with a bouquet of flowers and a cake. Oh, this is unnecessary, Angelica said embarrassedly, taking the bouquet. Oh, what do you think? Alexander jokingly replied, going into the house. I brought the cake just in case. What if you are a terrible cook? Winked at the girl. Angelica almost choked with indignation, but then, appreciating the impertinent joke, grinned. I do serve a birch bark pie to harmful guests, but such pretty blondes can count on something better. Grandpa greeted the guest friendly, but without any jokes. They sat down to drink tea and the conversation began. It turned out that Alexander came to Cabanchichi to rest from the bustle of the city and at the same time in such favorable, inspiring conditions to work on some of his literary projects. He was 24 years old. He had recently graduated from the Faculty of Philology and was going to devote his life to literature, not only as a writer, but also as an editor, and the guy planned to work in a publishing house. Alexander generously told about himself, except for his family. He got off with general phrases about the fact that his father and mother are no longer in the world, and naturally, after this, neither Angelica nor Robert did not begin to ask about anything else. And then, somehow so imperceptibly, it turned out that Alexander and Angelica began to see each other more and more often. They were, in fact, meetings of friends. It turned out that Alexander knew only a little less about the local area than Grandpa Robert. Alexander showed Angelica an amazingly beautiful forest lake, and although now it was completely out of season, but from his words she easily and vividly imagined how in early summer it is covered with lily flowers. The guy invited her to go down into a small cave. Even more likely it was a grotto, but Angelica flatly refused and panicked, and he also did not hide the fact that she tries not to go out after sunset. And one day he asked her directly, "Are you afraid of the dark? Why do you say that?" Angelica answered as if indifferently, but her heart froze, because it seemed to her just nightmarish if the guy she had already begun to like so much and with whom she spent more time than with any man she had ever known before, found out about such a stupid, just shameful fear of her. It was just a thought. Angelica snorted indignantly and hurried to change the subject. But gradually their meetings began to take on a slightly different character than it could be with friends. Alexander began to look for opportunities to touch her more often. Angelica, without understanding why, but avoided it, somehow shrunk into a lump ball. And once when he saw her off and parted already on the porch of her house, Alexander reached for her face, fingertips outlined her cheekbone and went down to her chin. He said nothing, but came closer. "No," the girl exclaimed and turned away abruptly. Her head was pulled into her shoulders, her palms pressed into the shoulders, pushing away. Angelica did not know that in those moments Alexander managed to read in her eyes fear mixed with disgust, and he realized that these feelings did not apply to him, and he wanted to tear to shreds the one who dared to hurt the one who became indifferent to him. Alexander swore to himself that he would not hesitate to find out who Angelica had met before, and then he would find out who treated her unworthily. But right now he pretended that everything was fine, and simply, as if nothing had happened to say goodbye, left. One day the girl came home from the store and, sorting out her purchases, began to recount to her grandfather the conversation she had with the saleswoman. It was an ordinary, in fact, meaningless chatter, until Angelica mentioned that according to the sales clerk, Alexander really liked to vacation here. Just a few years ago came with his father Billy. "What?" Grandpa asked the question so sharply and in such a tone that Angelica jumped and almost dropped the carton of eggs, which she was going to put in the refrigerator. "Well, I told you that Alexander is here with his father." "Say his last name again," you said, "Billy." "Yes," nodded the girl, not understanding at all what the matter was. "You mustn't see him again," Robert said and sat down on a chair, putting his hand to his chest. He was having trouble breathing. "Oh, that's it, the creature." "Grandfather." Angelica was frightened on several occasions at once, both that her grandfather was ill and that he had reacted in such a way to the mere mention of Father Alexander's name. "Are you sick, doctor?" "No, granddaughter." The old man wrinkled his nose. "Everything is fine. No need for a doctor. I'm not quite decrepit yet. And as for that young man, you mustn't see him again, do you hear?" "But," Angelique blinked a lot. "Why?" Robert looked at his granddaughter carefully. He shook his head. "Sweetheart, just trust me. It's better this way." "But we have," began Angelica suddenly. "We are with him. He called me. On a date." "What?" Grandpa started to get up, but then he sat back down. "That's it. No, it's impossible." "But why? Did he do something wrong? Why are you forbidding me like a little girl? I'm an adult and I can do what I want." "No, as long as I'm alive, you can't see him." Barry's son can't be a good man. So this is about his father. Angelica finally figured it out. Did you two know each other? Robert got up at last. He came closer and put his trembling hands on Angelica's shoulders. Yes, granddaughter, Billy. That was the name of the man who... That's your father. Billy is the thug who crippled your mom's life. Alexander is his son, which means he's your brother. Angelique felt like the air in the room had run out. It had just been there and then it was gone. Instead of it spilled flames. And it now hit her chest with a heavy wave, making her gasp, look around panic-stricken. The girl waited in panic when she would lose consciousness, fall awkwardly on the floor. Yes, she would fall and hit, but for some reason it was not happening. What was said simply could not be reality, no. That her Alexander, that man who could so easily make her laugh, whose innocent touch awakened a storm of feelings, he turned out to be her brother? That's impossible. It's wrong. It shouldn't have happened like this. The evening and night, in which Angelica barely closed her eyes on the verge of dawn, seemed to her an agonizing eternity. Again and again she asked her grandfather how could it be? Could it be a different Billy? But he answered that no, it was. After all, this man, who was mentioned in the store conversation, many people remembered here until now, he heard the whole neighborhood in fear. Angelica did not know what to think. She suddenly remembered how Alexander had scared those guys in the car away from her. They so backed off. Can it be that appearance and impressions all turned out to be deceptive? That his father raised Alexander to be a copy of himself, and he's just as much of a monster? And also Angelica could not understand. Did Alexander himself know about it? Did Alexander know that his father was a bandit? And although her grandfather ordered and practically begged her not to see him anymore, Angelica decided to do her own thing. And the next day, she went to the place where they agreed to meet outside the village, near the forest edge, where the field began, from which the ride had recently been taken off. Seeing Alexander approaching, the girl got up from the stump where she had been sitting before and clasped her hands. "Hi," said the guy and frowned, noticing her face with such an expression, which mixed fear, disgust, and hope. He had never seen her before. Angelica decided to deal with it quickly. "I was told your father's name was Billy. Is that true?" He was a gangster, wasn't he?" Alexander was taken aback. He hadn't expected this conversation. Or rather, he hadn't expected it to happen so soon and in such an uncomfortable way when he wasn't the one setting the tone. Yes, Billy was doing business, not quite legally. He'd been punished for it, and then went back to business without a mistake. Mistakes? Angelica gasped and took a step back. "So you call the dirt and blood on his hands mistakes?" "Angelica, calm down. I didn't put it that way. I only meant to say that at the end at the end. I'm more interested in how it all started. Your father," the girl sobbed. My mom." Alexander closed his eyes for a moment and then, opening them, looked, as it seemed to Angelica, into her heart. "I know. Angelica, listen, I have so much to tell you. There's a lot you don't know. And I." "So you do know?" She exhaled. "Do you know that you are my brother?" said the girl in a colorless voice. "You are my brother. You knew that too, man. You asked me out. You almost kissed me then. How could you? How could you?" Angelica felt nauseous. A suffocating, viscous lump of it seemed to flood her entire being. And it was a feeling she knew well. She had experienced it when her stepfather had attacked her. "Grandfather was right," the girl sobbed. "Angelica, I'll explain everything. I don't." The boy started, but Angelica, having shrieked briefly, didn't let him finish and slapped her cheek with the palm of her hand. Angelica had never hit anyone before, and it became so hard. It seemed that inside now breaks off, burns out something infinitely valuable, which will never come back. "I hate you. I hate you. Don't you dare come near me." Choking on her tears, Angelica retreated. "Never. Do you hear me? Never." And she ran. The wind blew in her face. The weather began to deteriorate, and from the horizon floated rapidly, carried fluffy monstrous thunderclouds. Alexander did not rush after her. He stayed where he was. He just didn't know. He didn't know how to say that she just didn't know the whole truth. and that they could be together. There's no obstacle to that. She just didn't want to hear about it. He was also distracted by a phone call. It was a call from a man whom Alexander had instructed to solve an important issue, and from the first words, as he answered it, it became clear that everything was much worse than he thought. Already approaching the house, Angelica began to suffer a bad feeling. The girl froze when she saw a white ambulance in the yard, and then rushed forward, as far as breath and strength after running from heartless, disgusting betrayal. "Grandfather? Grandpa!" screamed the girl, rushing toward the stretcher that was being loaded into the car. "What happened?" "Are you his granddaughter, Angelica?" asked the doctor, who caught her carefully. "He called for you." "It's okay. He's alive." "A heart attack. He needs to be hospitalized. You can come with us." The young doctor spoke quickly and clearly, keeping eye contact with the distraught girl. Yes, Angelica nodded. Of course he wanted to come, and so scared for dear beloved grandfather that all other problems, his own broken heart, all receded into the background. In the end, after the grandfather was in the ward of the hospital of the district center under the careful supervision of doctors, Angelica had to go back, with great difficulty, but the doctors managed to persuade her that spending the night in the hospital is not the best idea. Besides, the patient needed to bring some necessary personal belongings from home. And only when she went outside, Angelica realized that she had neither money nor even a cell phone with her. And meanwhile, it was getting darker and darker. "Wow, what people!" A car with guys from the village slowed down near her. "It's cold to look at you," smirked the one who sat in the driver's seat. Angelica was surprised to realize that it was really cold, and she was wearing a light dress, which she had chosen in the morning, when the weather was still wonderful and warm in summer. "Are you waiting for the streetcar?" the guy in the back seat asked snidely, but immediately received a poke in the side from his buddy. "Stop laughing. Can't you see something's wrong with her?" He leaned out the window. "What's wrong?" Angelica did not like to cry in front of strangers, but here she burst into tears and said that her grandfather became ill, and she did not know how to return home. "So get in, we'll give you a ride." The driver waved an inviting hand. "Well, if you're not afraid, like last time, we're honest. We're not evil people." Angelica nodded. She thought that she had made a mistake once before. She thought that Alexander was a good guy. She had fallen for how nice he was, and it turned out. So now she opened the door without fear and climbed into the back seat. The two guys had to squeeze in. On the way, they exchanged a few phrases. The guys introduced themselves as Max, the driver Mickey, the one who had asked about the streetcar, Harvey, and Steve. And then one of them mentioned Alexander in the conversation. Angelica asked that this was a man she didn't want to talk about at all. "Did they have a fight? I thought you two were like that. Dating." Harvey said, "Well, it's common knowledge in the village." "No, it's nothing like that." Angelica burst into flames. "He's not at all what I thought he was. He's a terrible man." "Is that Alexander?" Max marveled sincerely. "Well, you women honestly do not understand. You want bad guys. You don't like who would refuse, eh?" When Barry got out of crime, he became a businessman. He made a lot of money, and then he died, just like his friend in the accident. It's mystical. And then there was a lot of noise that Barry gave everything to this kid in his will. He was a regular guy, but now he's a millionaire. Obviously, everyone was wondering why, so they started talking. Barry lived his whole life alone. He had women, but only for a while. He changed them like foreign cars. I guess he realized later that he hadn't had time to have children. Mickey joined in the story again. They started saying Alexander was Barry's son. Blood. Well, as if he'd had an affair with his friend's wife once, and then, in order not to ruin the family, kept everything secret. So it turned out that somehow everyone here decided that Alexander was the heir of that bandit, and that was it. Well, at first, we also thought that hair came, we would all go under bandits again. But then we talked to him, and it became clear that Alexander is not engaged in any such business. He is as pure as snow. And what they say, well, what difference does it make? Whether he's Barry's son or not? Barry's like a second father to him. He helped him get back on his feet. "Oh, we've had a good talk," Steve said, nodding toward the road, where the village loomed ahead. Well, we got you there. Well, you. Angelica got out of the car as if in a trance, and her head did not fit all that she heard now. In general, we told you everything as it is, summarized Max. Bye. And the car drove off. Angelica walked through the yard to the house. The meager, milky white moonlight was chasing dry autumn leaves. Some twigs crunched under her feet, and the girl distantly thought about the fact that the garden was in such disrepair. It would be necessary to put everything in order. Angelica did not allow herself to think that something terrible could happen to her grandfather. Grandpa Robert is a tough guy. He'll be fine. He'll live to be 100. Forcing herself to smile, Angelica walked up the porch and stopped in front of the door. I think she locked it when she left in a hurry in the ambulance. If such a return to the house with unlocked doors had happened to her before, she would have been terrified. But the past events had thrown her into a strange state of mind, and she acted as if she were acting machine-like, without thinking. And only when the door closed and the hallway was plunged into darkness, Angelica woke up, shrieked quietly, and tapped her hand on the wall in search of a switch. Where is it? Where? I found it. Something rustled, and Angelica did not immediately realize that it was the wind howling outside the windows. And until the light flashed brightly in the hallway, Angelica stood there and her gaze hysterically darted around the corners, the floor. Fear, that almost childish hidden, spread its paws, crawled out inexorably, but it was chased away by the light. The girl even began to laugh right about her grandfather said. Well, what nonsense. There's nothing like that in the dark. Angelica in general lately began to think that she was not afraid of anything. She was less afraid of the dark. And the memories of her stepfather and his ugly hands faded. Everything was getting better until she learned the truth about Alexander. Angelica shook her head. What on earth was that supposed to mean? He might not be her brother, but what does that change? Does it change everything? Or should she not be foolishly naive? Because how could a man like Barry have good friends? Could a normal young man who agreed to live and build his life, in fact, under the patronage of this monster? Angelica shook her head. Oh, she was thinking about the wrong thing. After all, right now she had other things to do, to collect the things that her grandfather would need at the hospital, also to inform his friends what happened, plus, of course, to prepare a home-cooked meal. These were all things Angelica decided to do early in the morning. The girl smiled, imagining how she would surprise her grandfather with his favorite zucchini pancakes. Only it is necessary not to fry them, and it is better to bake them in the oven. She went to her room and set her alarm clock for 7 in the morning. Then she took a shower and changed into her favorite warm pajamas. The girl reached for the bedside table to turn on the night light. She had already resigned herself to the fact that she would probably sleep with at least some light on for the rest of her life. But her hand found only a void. Angelica frowned and dropped it on the floor. She looked around, behind the nightstand and under the bed. The nightlight was nowhere to be found, but she definitely remembered it being here. Grandpa would never move her things without asking, and why would he? Suddenly the light in the room went out. Angelica gasped and hurriedly grabbed the phone. Hurry! The bright light of the tiny flashlight built into it cut through the darkness. She stepped out into the hallway. There didn't seem to be any light anywhere. None of the switches had tripped. Angelica sighed. This was such a thunderstorm. She felt uncomfortable. Would she really have to spend the night like this, leaving her phone on until morning? She glanced at the battery image and just clutched her head, ran her fingers through her hair and squeezed it nervously. There was only one division left in green. The phone was practically dead, and since there was no electricity, that meant it was about to go out. But before panic set in, she remembered that in the kitchen, in the sick closet, the most ordinary candles and matches should be kept, which meant everything would be fine. She would be left in total darkness. It was only a short walk to the kitchen, and in order not to be so frightened, because the darkness was too much around, Angelica quietly began to hum a song. A beautiful voice, my little one. The girl stopped as if she had hit a wall. Her body stiffened. No, not with fear. It was a different feeling. Hard, all-encompassing, paralyzing. She breathed often. Did you miss your daddy? Angelica glanced away, then found the strength to turn around. Her stepfather stood about 4 feet away from her on the threshold of the next room. the living room, lit sparingly by the moon, which had finally emerged as a gray disk through the gaps in the rain clouds. What? How? The words stuck in my throat, my tongue refusing to utter them. Did you think your old man would save you? My stepfather smirked, or rather grinned. Not hiding the pleasure, but not delaying it, he told his stepdaughter how it was. How he came to his senses in the morning, beaten, humiliated. For a few days it was all the same, where the little trash and the old man disappeared. But then different thoughts began to come, and then a man contacted him, called the lawyer who represents Robert's interests. He said that Robert intends to sell the apartment. And I thought, continued the stepfather, what does that mean? Me, the breadwinner of the family on the street. All, Angelica grew up, big became, and that's it. Do not need a man in the house. Think she will live on her own. She's so big. Well, what are your eyes bulging? Stepfather stepped forward. You grandfather, began Angelica, but he interrupted. You're a fool, Angelica. No, it was different. I've been here a long time. I've been looking after you. Well, it's a nice house. Expensive, I suppose. And you were so poor. Well, we'll fix everything, he muttered quietly, thinking something over, and smiled at her again in a nasty way. He looked at her from top to bottom, as if he were groping her. You're hiding in your pajamas like a sack. You should put on a nightgown, or even better, stockings. Angelica shook. She shook her head. No, she whispered, feeling tears forming in her eyes. I was just thinking, the stepfather continued, and took another step. How fortunate it all turned out. The old man's gone. You and I, sweetie, alone. It's a long night. We'll have time to talk, and you'll have time then to sign over your share of the apartment. It was only here that Angelique realized her mistake. She should have run to the street and then to the village. Of course, there, on the road, there would be nowhere to hide. But what prevents his stepfather now go looking for him? And the girl also thought that now it was time to call for help, but the phone suddenly went out of battery. Whimpering, Angelica shook it as if that would revive the battery. In this room, there was also a little light coming through the window. Angelica could see the table, a large armchair with a carved back. This was where Grandpa wanted to make an office, and suddenly her eyes caught on the bag, her grandfather's second travel bag, which had disturbed her on the train. It took Angelica only a few moments to remember what was stored there and how it could help her. Meanwhile, behind the door, somewhere in the corridor, John's drunken shouts and the sounds of doors opening were heard. He was checking the rooms, looking for her. And there was no doubt that sooner or later, and most likely not too late, he would reach this one. Could there be another way out? Angelica ran to the window, opened it, but second floor. She was just afraid to jump down. There weren't even any bushes that could theoretically cushion the fall, only the stonework in this part of the courtyard. Angelica cried again. Freedom is so close and she can't get it. Meanwhile, judging by the sounds, her stepfather had busied himself with checking the room across the hall. Trying not to make any noise now, Angelica grabbed the bag. She opened it, opened the box. Naturally, it was impossible to handle such a tool as this trap silently. The girl had time to curse herself. Well, where would she get the strength and in general, how to handle this thing? The trap had no teeth, and so Angelica could act more boldly, sharper, without fear of injury. Finally, it opened with a rattle. How she did it and did not realize it herself, just worked with her hands, turning off her head. In the next moment, the trap was on the floor near the door, and Angelica herself snuck away, lurking behind the closet, just in time. The door slowly opened. Where are you, little girl? You know, I don't like hiding. Come out yourself, or it'll be worse. The last word turned into a shrill cry of pain as John's foot caught in the trap. He just didn't see it, because when he entered the room, he was shining the flashlight in front of him, not down below. Angelica lunged straight at her stepfather, dodged, but felt his fingers trying to grab her leg. Shit. John sent a couple more curses after her. The first wave of pain was gone, and his body had little sense of reality after the drink. The man realized that his leg didn't seem to be broken. John dug his hands into the brackets and pulled them apart. How did the damn thing open? How did it get in here in the first place? And how did Angelica, the weak, fearful Angelica, know how to do it? How dare she? After vividly imagining what he'd do to her when he got there, John finally managed to free the limb. He groaned through clenched teeth as he stood up and decided he would never let the girl live for this. Angelica ran through the dark house, and for the first time this darkness did not frighten her. Now all the horror, all the fears, all the nightmare that could only exist for her in the universe embodied in her stepfather. The girl was descending the stairs, had already put her foot down on the last bottom step, when suddenly the foot in the slipper awkwardly led sideways. Shrieking, Angelica fell down, bumping her elbow painfully. Gasping for breath, she got up and ran into something. Strong arms embraced her, lifting her above the floor. The girl screamed, struggling to break free. "Angelica, it's okay. Angelica, it's me." The familiar voice had a better effect in an instant than if the light had suddenly turned on. The light, by the way, was coming from the street through the open door, and it was coming from the flashlight dropped on the floor by the one who was holding her. Angelica stared at Alexander's face, opening her mouth helplessly. For some reason she couldn't speak. Finally, she squeezed out hoarsely. "Your stepfather." Alexander nodded, then bent down, picked up the flashlight, and holding Angelica under his arm, led her to the door. "Come on, I'd already called for help." But she couldn't take a step. Her ankle was pierced by pain. Alexander picked her up in his arms and carried her out of the house. His car was just outside the yard gate. "What? How did you?" Angelica clung to him, clung desperately as he set her on the ground, and then, opening the door to the front passenger seat, helped her into the car. "I'll tell you later," he replied sternly. "Stay here." "Where are you going?" "No." Angelica was horrified when she realized that Alexander was walking back to the house. "It's all right," he turned to her. "But he mustn't go. He can't get away with this." "A trap," Angelica said hurriedly, wrapping her arms around her shoulders. "I said a trap." "What?" the boy asked in surprise. "Where did you? Are there traps in the house?" "One. Grandfather's. I put it in the room he came in and he got caught with his foot." "What have I done?" Alexander came back, leaned toward her. His palms rested on the girl's face, forcing her to raise her head and look into his eyes. "Don't worry. Everything will be all right. Just be here." Much later, returning in memories to the events of that night and the next day, Angelica wondered how all of them, starting from the moment when Alexander took her out of the house in his arms, were put together in one brief segment, as if cutting fragments from a movie in which she, by the will of an evil fate, was destined to play the main role. The stepfather was too drunk and clumsy. He ran into Alexander at the top of the stairs, but he almost fell down, and the guy easily managed to pull him to the floor and tie the villain's hands with his own belt from his pants. And then came the help. It turned out that Robert's grandfather in the village was a lot of old acquaintances. Someone visited him in the hospital, and of course, because of the visitors was nothing to think about, even a little time to keep what happened in secret. Angelica only tried to soften the whole picture, to disturb her grandfather less. But to her amazement, he only said that she was a good girl, and on the part in which the trap was involved, and laughed at all, and so that the nurse looked in to find out what happened. "Nothing," he said, wiping the tears from his eyes. "Here, I had a memorabilia with a history, a trap antique. They said they used to catch werewolves with it. Well, such a legend, but here's how it turned out. Also, a kind of werewolf. My granddaughter caught a creature that pretended to be a man, and our family soul entered." "Oh, what a story. It turns out I've kept this junk all these years for a reason." John was furious that his plan had failed. He did not hesitate in expressions in everyone he saw, talking about how he hates stepdaughter, what a bad girl she is. Finally, it became clear that he had a problem with his head. John would suddenly start sobbing and say that it was him. He was the victim. Because while he was sitting there in the darkness of the house, while he was walking through it wounded, he had suffered all sorts of things. He swore on his life that Alexander, who had grabbed him, had eyes that burned with fire and claws on his hands, that he smelled of wet dog and had fangs in his mouth that glistened in the moonlight. He was also afraid now, hysterical if he was in the dark. John had been declared insane. "You won't see him again," Alexander said, and hugged Angelica, gently and tenderly, so tightly that it was easy to feel the desire to shelter his beloved from the world. He told her that some time ago he had become aware that his stepfather was looking for Angelica. Alexander learned that John had come to the village, and while the stepfather was watching the girl, he himself was being watched. Alexander wanted to wait a moment and have a serious talk with this man, threaten him, but here it turned out he missed it. At some point, he got word that John had gone somewhere. At first, he thought that John had left the village, but when he realized where he had gone, he barely managed to save Angelica. And almost immediately, the day after the rescue, Alexander clarified the most important thing. He said he was not related to Barry by blood. He'd had doubts about that, even when the family friend had called them over. He told Billy himself honestly about it, admitted that the rumors had raised doubts. And to dispel them, he suggested a paternity test. And it turned out that the rumors were just rumors. And Alexander also told that in confidential conversations, his patron expressed regrets that much in his life has done wrong, a lot of evil. Robert, after Alexander saved Angelica, changed his opinion of him and added that during his illness, he had plenty of time to think about everything. "I was wrong," Robert said firmly. "Just because Barry was his family doesn't say that Alexander himself is bad. After all, John was in our family. There are different things after all." Alexander objected suddenly. "I took him in willingly, and you and your granddaughter were forced to live like this. But I'm grateful that you're giving me a chance. I just see how you have changed Angelica," Robert grinned. "She has blossomed with you. Anyway, since there is no other elder relative, I personally give the go-ahead for your marriage." "Grandfather," Angelica exclaimed. "We do not." "You beat me to it," Alexander smiled. "I was going to propose to Angelica, but apparently now there will be no surprise. But the essence won't change, will it?" With these words, Alexander knelt down on the floor and took out a scarlet velvet box from his pocket and opened it in front of Angelica. "I am not good at long, beautiful speeches, probably because I'm more used to writing books. I just want to say that I love you. I guess that's what they call love at first sight. I want us to be together forever, and I'm willing to do anything for that." Angelica listened, and it seemed to her that all this was not happening to her. And at the same time, they did not doubt the truthfulness of Alexander's words. "I agree," the girl answered quietly, and the next moment on her finger was a ring with a large, transparent and shining, like a dewdrop, diamond. In addition to Robert's grandfather, there were other patients in the room, and they, who had been quiet, but had been watching with great interest, suddenly began to say congratulations, and some of them even clapped their hands. A nurse, now displeased with the double, looked in again, but when she heard the cause of the commotion, she could not remain indifferent to it. After Robert recovered, of course, they talked about the future. If earlier grandfather was going to sell the apartment in order to make his granddaughter a single room and to buy a room for his old age, probably with the same lonely old people, now there was no need for this. Alexander was sufficiently provided for Robert to keep his home. But that was not all. Angelica's future husband insisted that the house in Kabankiki should be put in the best possible condition, providing it with the best modern renovations, but necessarily one in which the house could retain its unique original style. Grandfather was right. Alexander's society continued to influence Angelique in the best possible way. And by the time they were married, she had rid herself of the heavy burden of past memories. The night after the wedding, when it was time for bed, Alexander smiled at his young wife and asked if she should leave the light on for the night. "No," replied Angelica with a smile. "Now I am no longer afraid of the dark, because I have you." Soon after the wedding, the girl realized her dream of entering the same faculty that her grandfather had once studied. Robert said that of course he would definitely help her with her studies. And Alexander published his book, a collection of legends about werewolves, and although his wife still didn't like the scary books and movies her husband sometimes entertained herself with, she read his book and said it was terribly interesting.